Podcast Network. Thank you for being here.
The Philosophemes Podcast. Deep Roots. Dangerous Ideas. The Canon remixed.
I'm out here in the mountains of Colorado doing some landscaping. So 2 public service announcements, and then I'm going to introduce my next guests. So first public service announcement, sorry for my outfit and my introduction. I am so busy right now. I just cannot get all this stuff done. If I could, whenever I'm just writing, I can write all night, and I don't have to prepare myself for audio and visual. So audio and visual, it just takes too much time to keep up with. But at the same time, I'm sitting on a mountain of content, so pun intended. And so first public service announcement, sorry for this type of intro. Second one is I'm going to do a couple of intros like this just so I can get them out of the way, and then I got to finish editing up these videos and put them out. I have some amazing guests that I have already recorded that I haven't had a chance to edit and post yet, and I've also got some amazing guests in the future coming up. I'm so excited. In some ways, it's a tremendous amount of work, but I think it's worth it for now, and I'm so happy that my guests have agreed to come on the show, and I think we really are putting some good stuff together. So having said all of that, now I would like to announce my guests. All right, so I want to say right off the bat, in regard to my next guests, that I have a ton of respect for them. So my next guests are the authors of Professional Philosophy and Its Myths, Dr. Rebekah Spera and Dr. David Pena-Guzman. And again, I want to say tons of respect for these 2 philosophers, these 2 authors. First off, I really do enjoy their book, as you'll hear me say in this video, but also I think that it does excellent work, and I think it does point the way forward, which is wonderful. There are some places, really kind of one major place, but that I disagree with them. And I'm mentioning it here because I want to say that this is a part of the reason why I respect these 2 individuals so much, is that they were willing to go into deep water with me, and they were willing to debate some very sensitive and very serious topics with me, and they did so in an unflinching manner. I take these 2 individuals to be very serious. I take them to be excellent philosophers and excellent teachers, and I really appreciated this interaction. I really enjoyed it a lot, and I felt like I learned some things. It helped me gain some insights. So again, I want to thank Dr. Spera and Dr. Pena-Guzman for coming on the show. I hope that in the future I'll get to speak with them again, or speak with them one-on-one in the future. I really think that this topic that they are writing about is a serious topic, and that it needs to be worked on. In fairness, I wanted to read their publisher's description of the book to kick this off. In Professional Philosophy and Its Myths, Dr. Rebekah Spera and Dr. David M. Pena-Guzman argue that academic philosophy is steeped in a host of myths that keep professional philosophers in a state of self-ignorance, understood as unconscious schemas that shape philosophers' collective imaginary. These myths perform a dangerous ideological function within the discipline. Not only do they contribute to the overwhelming demographic homogeneity of the profession, ensuring that philosophy remains a holdout of white and male dominance, but they also prevent philosophers from seeing themselves as workers do, like all workers who sell their labor for a wage under capital. We are subject to alienation, exploitation, and oppression. After outlining and critiquing these myths, Spera and Pena-Guzman call upon philosophers to collectively invent new myths that will enrich rather than impoverish their psychic and professional lives. Through these new myths, they argue a new philosophy, a philosophy of the future, will be born. So again, when this video starts, you know, I think I was so excited. I don't know if they were so excited, but I was so excited that we just sort of jumped right in. So I just wanted to say up front, I wanted to read that book description. We're going to immediately start talking about these myths and what they mean by it, and talking about the question of what is an authentic philosophical self, or if there is an authentic philosophical self. So that is the context in which we are discussing or having a discussion, and we just jump in immediately. That's probably my fault. I should have waded in a little bit, but I was just so excited to get to the heart of the matter with them. And again, much respect, so grateful and happy that they came on the show, and I hope to work with them again in the future. All right, I hope you enjoy this. Thank you.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
Make your next move with American Express Business Platinum. Enjoy complimentary access to the American Express Global Lounge Collection, and with a welcome offer of 150,000 points after you spend $20,000 on purchases on the card within your first 3 months of membership, your business can soar to new heights. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum. Amex Business Platinum. Built for business by American Express.
All right. Thank you so much. It's good to see both of you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you, David?
I'm just getting to my office, and we have this like cleaning, and, like no time up until like 8 a.m. So I had to sit. I got here really early, and then I had to sit in my car to make sure it didn't get towed for like 40 minutes. So I was reading some random book that I found in the back of my car. How are you, Frank?
I'm well, thank you, David.
Yeah.
What do you have like a set of random books in the back of your car?
I have a couple that have just been like accumulating over the months. And so today was a random book on like psychological research from the 1960s that I just haven't returned to the library.
Excellent. That's excellent. Wow. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to talk with me. I have, we can kind of do this however you'd like to do it. I have I set up like a little bit of a skeleton structure just to kind of guide us through, but I'm happy to chat about anything at any point. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll follow your lead in however you want to do it. Just to get a sense, roughly, is this like an hour long, 30-minute, or an hour? Just to get a sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
hey, if we feel like we're done, then we can stop. Whatever you feel like doing, it's all good. I didn't know what to set it for, so I set it for.
Oh,
an
that's
hour,
fine. No,
yeah.
that's perfect. I'm not in a rush. Make it be 3 hours. Come on, let's do the marathon.
The only thing I have to do after this is grading. So if this goes for 4 hours, I'll be tickled.
Right, that's great. It's a perfect excuse not to grade. Yeah. Well, so let me see here. I've got some note cards that I put together. So I just want to say I really enjoyed reading your book. So thank you. And if I were to divide your project into sort of a diagnostic and a therapeutic phase, right? Just as a way to kind of get a grip on this, right? I would say that I agree 100% with your diagnosis. I I was ecstatic and actually to the point of just grinning from ear to ear to read some of the things that you wrote. Chapters 3 and 4, in my opinion, are just absolutely tremendous. I was telling my significant other, I said, hey, chapter 4 is worth the price of admission alone, even if it was just if that's all that it was chapter 4. I'm in. At the same time, if you want me to find some places that we might be able to push back, for some fun and enjoyment and stuff like that, I'm up for that as well. And so I guess I would say, in regard to the therapeutic piece, I think that you are correct. I think that I'm happy to discuss this, but I feel like really it is the case that the only way forward is the way that you suggest in your book. So I feel like I'm on board with that as well. I feel like I want to. Well, I know that I disagree with. I disagree with some of the things, perhaps in regard to your ontology of the philosopher, which would be fun, I think, to kick around a little bit. But again, I thought that this was, extremely well written. I saw that you used the word vaunted. That really excited me.
I think that's a Rebekah word. I think.
I was about to say that's a David word, frankly.
Really, vaunted.
David. You like to, any place where there's a flight of high rhetoric is probably David's. I'm more of the let's keep it modified, modulated a little bit. But yes, I'm glad that you enjoyed the writing.
So you both, if I'm remembering this correctly, you both also teach writing. Is that correct? Or you're involved with writing centers or something like that? Or
that would be more me.
Okay.
David is a professor at what's your department again, David?
Well, it just changed names this year again. So I'm in a Humanities and Complet Together program in San Francisco.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. I'm the one who works more specifically in writing studies, mostly as a matter of professional happenstance that happened to work well with our book. But by training, I'm a philosopher, but I'm currently employed in a writing department.
Well, outstanding. I mean, I really, the flow of the text, and it was enjoyable to read. I really enjoyed it. So I wanted to nod my hat to you for that as well.
Thank you. This is the first interview or the first time we talk about it since it just came out. Yeah.
Okay. And when exactly did it come out?
January?
January
or December. It was December or January of last year.
Yeah.
Okay. Outstanding. I've never seen anyone. These statements are not loaded in any way, shape, or form, right? But so not yet. If you want me to load statements, but I've never seen anyone in a professional academic text like this say these things about the adjunct system. And so anyway, I was just like I said, so happy. I mean, some of the conversations that I've been having with my colleagues, my former colleagues, and so forth, about the way that they've been treated by universities. It's so upsetting that it's difficult to describe how upsetting it is. I mean, you talk about unionization and things like that, and just these people with PhDs. I mean, people who have really spent a lot of time, sacrificed a lot in order to be able to teach philosophy, just being treated like they don't matter one bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciated reading your chapters on that. I really hope that it is the case that it changes the system. But so I'll tell you what, I've got some questions for you. I'll fire them up. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So In regard to your myths, the one thing that really caught my attention was the idea, not just in kind of, I had some like Derrida and Deleuze things floating around in the background here, but this idea that not just that we should critique myths, but that also that we should cultivate or create them. I was thinking of this Deleuzian idea of creating concepts and such. So I guess it's a sort of a two-part question. So the one is that what makes a myth generative rather than merely ideological? But maybe that's not even a viable distinction. So we might say something like, how could we avoid just replacing one set of rules with another set of rules? But I don't know. I hope you understand what I'm trying to get at with this question, because maybe it's the case that that's what we have to do.
David, do you want to take this or shall I?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. So I think that's a great question. And it's one that David and I struggled with, but maybe we should return to how we conceptualize myth itself. One of the things that we were very cautious about in the book is that so much of philosophy's originary mythos has to do with deflating myth, or the idea that you can sort of get down to the bedrock of truth if once you sort of do away with the ideological, it uses the term ideology really loosely, like the ideological spell of the mythological, the poetic, the obfuscation of that kind of writing and that kind of thinking. And so part of the reason, I maybe this is just a précis to answering your question, like we're trying to think about refiguring rather than demythologizing entirely, because to us, demythologization is the mythological foundation of philosophy itself and has pernicious effects, as we describe in the book. But this gets to your question, which is, right, if we're going to not just sort of point to this sort of truth with a capital T, or that we can sort of free ourselves of all mythological functions. I mean, myth has a kind of constitutive community building function, and doing away with myth is itself mythological. So what do we do with our myths? So how do we, test the spirits, so to speak, when it comes to mythology, which is what your question is. And I would say, and David, you can elaborate on this, there's a couple of things. I mean, the question is like, does the myth foreclose, or does it open up possibilities for philosophy, would be one possible way of thinking about it. As we, if our diagnosis of the foundational myths of philosophy are correct, in that case, we can see what ideological function that it does. And so we sort of propose myths tentatively because we do have some concerns about, just sort of another governing mythology that's just as prescriptive and narrow and stifling as the current myth. David, if you want to take it from there, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I'll add that on our account. And I think this is important to underscore. There is no myth that is inherently liberatory or inherently ideological. Yeah. The political meaning of myths takes off from its interaction with the material sphere, right? How it shapes social relations, how it alters people's self-understanding. And so in that regard, we talk about a couple of myths that have been moving around the history of philosophy for a long time, some of which we believe have now played a strong ideological function such that maybe we ought to move away from them. But there are others that we interpret as a little bit more ambiguous, where there is the possibility of reclaiming the myth and taking it in a new direction. And so at the end of the book, where we propose new myths, where we could envision how philosophy might change if philosophers in their professional lives started thinking about themselves in a new way, we propose them, as Rebekah says, tentatively, because we do recognize that. And so there is this recursive nature to our proposal, which is that it's not as if the things that we propose, these new myths, are going to be enacted, and then once in place, they're going to guarantee freedom of thought and action for philosophers of the future. It might be that in the future, new relations of power emerge that require a new remythologizing. And so remythologizing is just as central as mythologizing itself for us in the constitution of philosophy. And we just want philosophers to be attentive to that, because we feel like we've been stuck under a particular mythic regime for so long that we are forgetting to shake up the snow globe and, give rise to new myths that might illuminate our professional worlds in new ways.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, David's mixed snow. That snow globe thing is the kind of thing I would have edited out of our manuscript. but just one final thing, and then I'll let you talk. I can see this is bringing up a lot of stuff, but I think in this respect we're very much historical materialists, right? Like the historical material conditions will change what is liberatory. You can think about the way that, arguably early scientific revolution, obviously that's a deep question, but there are some things that in certain moments provide apertures for change of some kind, and then they become dominant, and then, it becomes time. So we would never want to say we are instituting the new foundational myth or the endless future of philosophy. That's not at all what we're about. Great. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah. No. I think you're right. I think you're right. I think that's well said. I think that's the best answer that can be given. And when you talk about new forms of publication and things like that, I mean, I'm all for that. I think that's the way forward as well. So so it makes sense. I guess the question. Okay, so if I could push this toward a different question, then maybe from a different angle. So I'm going to go back to my note card here. So I wrote this down. So you critique. I think that this goes directly to what you just said. So you critique the philosophical personality as performative and institutionalized. That's fair. Okay, but is it possible? And this is really the heart of it for me. But is it possible to have a non-performative philosophical identity? And is there such a thing as here come the loaded terms, but is there such a thing as an authentic philosophical self?
Well, yeah, certainly. I think I'm speaking for Rebekah and I simultaneously when I say no, there is no such a thing as a core to which we can find our way through some kind of excavation project, right, where we dig up this kernel of philosophical truth that we all carry inside of us and that led us to become philosophers, of course. To be honest, I don't remember performativity being a central concept in the book, although we do talk about it in terms of the ways in which neoliberalism drives us to perform our own productivity, where we have to constantly talk about how busy we are as academics, and we wear signs and symptoms of burnout almost as a badge of honor. But it is true that there's a performative element in the sense that the mode in which we speak about ourselves produces a reality with material consequences. So in that sense, it is performative in the technical sense in which the term is used in the philosophy of language and also in gender theory, where performative is not merely a synonym for fake or inauthentic, but it refers to a mode of discourse that is generative of a material reality. So in that sense, what we do as philosophers, but also how we are trained to speak in order to register as philosophers in the space of public reasons, in academia, in higher education, it does generate an identity that then we seem to be stuck in many ways, and that we have difficulties breaking out of. And so what we try to do in the book is advocate for new ways of speaking qua philosophers so that we can poke a few holes in that identity that is ultimately becoming a little bit of an encasing or a scaffolding that's preventing us from moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. I think your question about performativity maybe touches a little bit on the question of alienation. Part of the chapter on the alienated philosopher, which you mentioned at the top of the interview, the philosophy, one of the things about, the sort of one of the things that we think is actually pretty unique or very distinctive in maybe degree, if not entirely unique in quality, is the way that the philosopher relates to their own work as if it were part of their identity. So there's a kind of myth of like the authentic philosopher that David alluded to in his answer before that actually conceals the alienation, right? So, you know, we can talk about performativity and all of the ways that that works and is it possible to not be performative, but I think the key thing about the particular kind of, you know, performance of busyness and the kind of psychic investment we have in this idea of we are philosophers that obscures the fundamental material fact of our labor. So I think it's kind of related to this, you know, economic alienation labor question as well. Maybe that's a little bit afield from performativity, but I think that the spirit of your question was kind of pointing in that direction.
Oh, I think that's outstanding. That's excellent. So I guess the reason that I was tuning into performativity was I was thinking about your discussion of psychodynamics and the imago and this notion of like an entelechy. And I guess so I'm thinking something like, if this is not an entelechy that involves some sort of authenticity, then, you know, is it more of like a performance of this? Is it more like a performance of a myth that, you know, that's kind of where I was, you know, that you're expected to be the maverick, right? You're expected to be overworked. You're expected to, you know, come in and, you know, be the champion of rugged individualism or something, you know?
Yeah, I think when we talk about the term imago, and we're trying to capture what we take to be a really complex process of formation that happens in professional philosophy. And we take the term from two different fields. We take it from biology, where it refers to like the last stage in the process of development of an insect, for example. But it also is a term that has deep roots in psychoanalysis, and it refers to an image of an idealized other that is internalized. So it's that which we want to be. And so we combine those two meanings in the book to refer to the ways in which, on the ground, when people enter the discipline of philosophy and they are trained to be philosophers, first in undergraduate, then in graduate school, and then when we have to jump through all the hoops of professionalization once we are on the teaching side of things in higher education, that process is not neutral. It is forming us, it is molding us to fit a specific type. And so on the one hand, it is an empirical process of indoctrination, but along the way, we come to internalize an image of who we ought to become at the end of that in order to be genuine philosophers who can speak the truth about the world, you know, whether that's a political truth, a moral truth, or just like a cosmic truth about the universe. And so in that regard, there is a performative element, although maybe the term that I would prefer to use there is something akin to indoctrination. And it's not dissimilar, to go back to the example that Rebekah used a few minutes ago, to the ways in which, since the scientific revolution, there is a process of formation that is in place for the creation of a scientific subject, the scientist, the experimenter, and how at the end of that process, what you get is an individual who is not just successful in terms of developing the right kinds of skills, but is successful in a psychic sense. And what I mean by that is somebody who truly sees themselves as belonging to a community of a chosen few who have access to knowledge that others do not.
So first off, that's excellent. That's excellent, and I agree with you. I used to joke around in grad school and say that professional philosophy involves a kind of Stockholm syndrome, right?
Yeah, I think this book was written out of that for both of us.
Yeah, we started this project when we were in grad school together. So
that's excellent. Well, that's actually one of the things I was going to ask you, is that what motivated you to write this? But I, you know,
we can hold off on that question. I'm sure. I think it's a good final couple of questions. Sure, I think I'd love to stay with the question of performativity.
Absolutely. So, I guess I agree with what you're saying, and I do I do recognize that it is absolutely indoctrination. So I want to hear what Rebekah has to say about this. Also, if you want to say some more about it, Rebekah. But I also want to I want to kind of, well, I guess actually return to your historical materialism point of view on this as well. Is that I sometimes, as I was thinking about this, I thought maybe it really is the case that what's driving this, though, is a kind of historical materialism, in the sense that what you were suggesting about this idea of the philosopher as one and the philosopher as maverick and these sorts of things, I think that for me at least, what I kind of see on the horizon is just the end of that kind of thinking period, right? Like the communal, just knowledge as communal property, right? And so no one is really going to be I'm not sure what word I want to use here. Oh, I guess we're sliding into the conversation about meritocracy. So forgive me, I'm putting too much on the table here. But so anything you'd like to say about any of that, Rebekah or David, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, so this and maybe you can tell me if I'm taking your question, if I'm misunderstanding. But it seems like what you're asking is about the de-emphasis on learning, the de-emphasis on the humanities, or the idea of a humanistic subject. Is that what's motivating this? Or I just want to make sure I understand your question.
No, so I guess, okay. So to get at the heart of the motivation for my question is that I believe there is an authentic philosophical self, right? And I understand that might be a part of my Stockholm syndrome. Right? But at the same time, I really do believe. It's not difficult to to know my philosophical commitment. So I'm a Kantian through and through. I'm a transcendental philosopher. I believe in the transcendental apperception of the unity of transcendental apperception, and so on and so forth. And so and I really dislike Hegel. I stand with Schelling and Heidegger and so forth. And so anyway, I think that there is an authentic philosophical self. And but I think that that's really that's and I was sort of surprised by this. I mean, I think that I'd love to kick all of this around with you, including meritocracy and such, but I was kind of surprised that I don't disagree with you more, right? In fact, and really, I think that where I do disagree with you, I don't know that it matters.
Actually, that was going to be my answer to your question, which is, I think I don't want to speak for David, but I think David and I are pretty historically materialist about the emergence of the idea of a philosopher out of history. But I don't actually think that that's necessary for somebody to read our book, because I think in some ways David and I are still obviously invested in philosophy, right? I mean, there's, obviously, right? And so, in some sense, like our understanding of like what philosophy's potential is, or like why we care about this as a field or as a place, a site of struggle, perhaps, is because we want to create the possibility for something like an authentic with maybe a million scare quotes relationship to philosophy, or a relationship to philosophy that has real possibility, would be maybe how we could put it. So I actually think your impulse to say that it doesn't really matter where we disagree on a kind of ontological level is correct, because whether you see the current order as stymieing or perverting or preventing, right, a kind of freedom in philosophy, a kind of like a deprofessionalization, a kind of a philosophy that is born out of like a real need in some sense, whether one thinks of that as a kind of universal human need, or if one thinks about these things in terms of historical materialism, actually doesn't really matter. Because I think if you have the correct diagnosis of the current mythic order, what's underneath that or what's beyond that, we all want something beyond what is. And I think that's what matters.
Yeah, and I'll add, we tried to punt the question of how this project came about, but maybe it's now creeping upon us, because Rebekah and I really did write this project largely based on our fraught relationship to the discipline of philosophy, where we both feel very committed to philosophy, to philosophical activity, to philosophical thinking, to philosophical community creation. And at the same time, we have found ourselves at odds with the myths that govern who can and cannot be a philosopher under the status quo. And so there is a deeply autobiographical dimension to this project that is not explicitly thematized, right? Like, we don't talk about our personal lives in the book, but I'll say that, we both met in grad school and we bonded over certain things about our identities and our experience that then explain why some things appear in this book. We bonded about coming from low income, working class backgrounds and not really knowing how we fit in this elite space of higher learning, where philosophy does have a connection to leisure, to travel, to culture with a capital C. And aside from that, Rebekah and I are both also 1 foot in, 1 foot out institutionally from philosophy. Rebekah teaches at a writing center. She's employed in a writing program. I am employed in a humanities and comparative literature program. And so we are both writing this from the perspective of individuals who were reared in philosophy, who love philosophy, but who also have experienced, to varying degrees and in different ways, the exclusionary forces that we describe in the book that are rooted in questions of race, that are rooted in issues of gender, and that are rooted in the politics of race. And so it's difficult at this point to separate this discussion about whether we think there is such a thing as an authentic philosophical self, I think, from our personal struggle of wanting to claim that self and sometimes feeling as if it's the discipline that throws obstacles in our way that are not there necessarily for other subjects in the same way.
Yeah, and I think I'll add to that, and like affirming everything David said, there's also an aspect of it that's like not just identitarian. It also has to do with like the broadness of our interests. I think, like, the kind of coming into philosophy with this, like, frankly, like, in retrospect, very naive notion that it's just the life of the mind. It's where I can pursue what the reason I chose philosophy versus any other field was because I thought it sort of encompassed everything on some level. But finding that in, and I'm very grateful for my philosophical training. I'm very happy that I've, have this depth of specialization, but at the same time, this kind of narrowing, right, of like the boundaries of inquiry was what I experienced as I advanced further and further with my degree. And I found that like my interests were broader. And I didn't see that as unphilosophical either. In fact, quite the contrary. And so this goes back to some of the things we say about the nature of specialization, the model, like the epistemic model on the sciences that you see in some fields, and the kind of academic trend chasing, which is not unique to philosophy, let's be honest, but that is so constitutive of our labor, even as we still promote this vision of philosophy as exactly what I thought it was when I was, a tender young, graduate student. So all those decades ago.
That's outstanding. Yeah, that's outstanding. So help me understand. So I guess where I'm coming up with this sort of, I'm not thinking pragmatically enough about your critique of myths. I think that's really that's kind of what's happening. But at the same time, I think that you are correct. I found myself, at first, when I first started teaching philosophy, I was very excited about this idea that, students would come up to me and they would say, I just changed my major to philosophy, right? I'd flex in the corner, whatever, it's like, oh, it's so great. I'm this is so wonderful. I'm saving all these souls with philosophy. But I tell you what, pretty quickly I started telling people, don't do it. And then I thought, well, now I'm going to get myself in trouble, but also I just started saying, hey, look, I mean, this was just a part of the introductory spiel for every class. It was like, hey, you're going to learn some stuff. You're going to get really excited about it. You're going to really like it. And you might consider changing your major. My recommendation to you is don't do it. Double major, sure, if you want to. But yeah, but don't change your major. So I think that, I'm 100% resonating with what the both of you just said. I guess, and I don't want to jump away from this. If there's more to be said, please let's say it. But this idea that, I mean, is it just the case that, for example, technology and so on and so forth, just as knowledge is becoming more of a sort of omnipresent for, I mean, it's amazing the things that you can do now with Google searches, for example, and these AI overview answers and so on and so forth. I mean, I feel like I'm not even searching things anymore. I feel like I'm communicating now, but if in light of that, I want to say something like, is that really ultimately what's driving the end of these myths, right? Is that what's allowing us to see that, like, oh, well, none of us can individually stand up against the machine. I mean, I forgive me, I'll just add one last little tidbit to this, is that I used to say things like, well, just multimedia in the classroom is more and more eliminating that old view of the professor with the bow tie and smoking the pipe or whatever, and who's pontificating about their last trip to Europe. That's right. I mean, there's no need for that now, because you don't need to listen to this guy go on about what the Louvre is like whenever you can just look at it yourself. I mean, I'm sure you can take a virtual tour nowadays, so is that kind, I mean, and that's the historical materialist piece, right? I mean, is that kind of what's driving the end of these myths?
David, do you want to take this, or shall I?
If you have thoughts, go for it.
I'll maybe want some clarification. So in terms of the end of these myths, I mean, there's I think what you're referring to, right, is the decline of the respect for the professor as expert, the kind of consumer model of education that's accelerated by all of the kind of, the YouTubeification of the classroom, right? Where it's, you kind of greet them, you're like, hi guys, like and subscribe. I need to compete with whatever it is you're watching on your laptop.
Well said.
But so in some very in the actual practice of teaching, I think what you're saying is completely correct. Yes, when you interact with students, absolutely. But nevertheless, I don't think that the myth of the philosopher as the as being this thing has gone away, even if students don't respect you and don't know the difference between an adjunct and a full professor, or even have a clear idea of what philosophy is, right? Nevertheless, this is still operative in our discipline, especially at the upper echelons. When you talk the people for whom being a philosophy professor are just by virtue of their institutional positions, right, at Ivies or baby Ivies or R1s, still kind of live that life and are, as the kids would say, all about that life. So the end of the myth, I think is, I think the material reality of the neoliberal university, the attention economy, et cetera, all of these things that you're describing are true on the ground, but that does not necessarily mean that our ideas about what philosophy are, or these myths, these that we say govern the profession, go away overnight and are replaced by YouTube professor or whatever. I really think that the ideological function is still there, even if the material basis for it, or it obscures that kind of basis, that fact about teaching, right? Because teaching is not really emphasized, right, in terms of philosophical identity, actually.
Yeah, and maybe I'll add that we could differentiate two different levels of mythology that apply to the philosopher. There are the myths that the general public has about the philosopher as a stuffy male professor who wears a jacket with I don't know, a brown and dirty yellow pattern, and is a pleat jacket or something like that. And that image, I do think, has been disappearing and is in the process of disappearing, largely thanks to changes in the demographic makeup of higher education, both in terms of the student body and also the professoriate. And so I think that's something for us to celebrate, that it has become diversified. But the kind of myth that we're talking about is not that. We're talking about the myths that are internal to the discipline of philosophy. And they're not myths about the professor that non-philosophers have. they're myths that philosophers have about who they are. This is why the book is framed ultimately as a return to that ancient problem of self-knowledge. Philosophers don't know who they are because we think about ourselves through the distorting lens of all these myths, right? Like, we have access to truth, we speak against the community, only we know the way forward toward liberation, freedom, and justice. And that myth is not going away. And in fact, I would say that in some cases, something that I've noticed, especially in the wake of not just the YouTubeification that Rebekah is talking about, but also the GPTification. Let's just turn everything into a noun today. Of higher education, is almost as if we're responding to the technological changes that are washing over higher education, sometimes with melancholy or a desire for a return to that old stuffy professor who pontificates about the real painting of the Mona Lisa that they really saw at the Louvre, because we are reaching for something to make sense of these very rapid changes that are happening on the ground. And I think Rebekah and I would want to maintain a critical attitude towards both. We want to critique the rise of this expectation that professors ought to mimic the structure of the attention economy, the short attention economy, as well as critique the increasing use of large language models in education, as if large language models are like a learning style suddenly, and also critique that notion of the philosopher with a capital P that I have noticed some people sort of yearning for now that they feel like the rug is being pulled from out under their feet.
Yeah, and I think this is really crucial, which I want to stress that, a lot of the, I've seen critiques of philosophy that are similar to ours in some ways that then turn into we need a Silicon Valley model, or we need to embrace the change, right? Like, we need to, philosophy is just stuck in the past. We need to go towards this bright, beautiful new future where we're talking endlessly about if ChatGPT is God or whatever. I'm being a little bit glib or a little bit dismissive, but we are not in that lane. We are not, valorizing the new at the expense of the old. It's just, but the critical eye in both directions is really crucial. I mean, especially I come out of Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. Technology is something I think about a great deal as a teacher and as a scholar. So I want to stress that, again, we are not saying, long live the new flesh in philosophy.
Oh, sure. Oh, no, excellent. And thank you both so very much for what you just said as well. So I guess just to be clear, where I was coming from is that I'm trying to understand why are these myths in decline? But I guess it really is a sort of number of factors, and most. I can't say which one is the weighs the most, but I think it also is the case in regard, and I thought David's distinction was very helpful in regard to how philosophers think of themselves. The internet has, and forgive me, I'm a little bit obsessed with technology, but so the internet has shown us a view of the human to a certain extent that it seems to me it's difficult to uphold this myth, or to use this myth as a kind of internal archetype or internal regulative idea for oneself. It seems difficult to uphold that. I'll give you a very simple example here that jumps out at me, is that something like, well, if you're so smart, then why aren't you super rich? You know what I mean? And I think that's almost a tautology for folks these days, right? Is that there such a thing as intelligence without the riches that come along from it? I mean, what other use is there for intelligence, kind of a thing, right? But and forgive me, the last thing I'd say about this is that the problem for me is it's speed, right? So I mean, even if if all these large language models can do, and I I believe they can do more, but if all that they can do is just sort of structure things in terms of dilemmas and allow you to choose for yourself, but also present that dilemma, with rich research baked into it, and present all that to you in a matter of 2 seconds. I mean, that's really hard to beat. From a professorial point of view. I mean, I help me out here. Maybe I'm way off base, but I guess this idea that why would I ask the professor? Why would I ask the professor?
I think this is a very complex problem. I think there's a couple of things. The perception that intelligence equals retrieval and synthesis of existing given frameworks for information is fundamentally misguided. I know that that's not what you're saying, but I mean I think we have to combat that reductive view of intelligence and reductive view of cognition. And maybe we're getting a little far afield, but as somebody who teaches writing, especially, it's what I've been thinking about a great deal as well. And one of the things that, and this is getting a little bit beyond our book, but I tend to think that the relation, especially with writing or thinking or the value of thinking or why ask the professor is because you are both minds thinking in time. And what a large language model is going to give you is the statistical average of its data set and word prediction. You're not actually seeing thought happen. And so I think valuing the process of thinking is not something you can really, that's not something that you can replace. And maybe I'm old fashioned, but I actually very much think that the formation of the self as a languaging being, the relationship between writing and composition and thinking for oneself in conversation, in dialogue with others, when you ask the professor, will they miss something? Yes, but that's actually not the point. In fact, the things that the professor highlights and includes is going to be based on their particular thinking at the time. You're not going to get that from large language models because large language models, to my mind, do not think. So, to kind of, maybe this is a very roundabout way of answering your question or not answering your question. I think, what's wrong is the model of the things that we value as a culture and our idea of what intelligence is. It's utterly perverse. And until you have a change in the overall perspective on what makes a subject, which is a philosophical question, a change in values, which is going to have to be a change in material conditions because students rightly see the university as a credentialization machine. They're not wrong about that. And that leads to the kind of 80%, right, that are using ChatGPT to do their homework for them because they see you as a vending machine for grades and credentialization. And that is something that no individual can fix, right? Anyway, so sorry, this is maybe more of a rant than an answer.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and maybe I'll add here that we are beginning to see a crisis in higher education concerning large language models. It's there was an article in the New York Times very recently about the extent to which students are cheating with ChatGPT and also the degree to which they see it as not cheating, right? They think that when they put a prompt into ChatGPT and get an essay that they've done the work because they told it what to do, because they see themselves as little CEOs who are telling their worker what to do and who can take for that work. I also agree with Rebekah that this is not thinking. Nonetheless, I think that we have to wonder, what is it about us as a community of learners that is leading us to see in something like a large language model, such as ChatGPT, something that could replace the student and the teacher simultaneously. And I think there's a connection to be made to our book because in some ways, ChatGPT is not threatening the myth that we talk about in the book of the ideal philosopher who thinks in a vacuum. In some ways, it's just a technological iteration of that myth. ChatGPT is disembodied. It doesn't have an identity. It doesn't have a history.
It has a view from nowhere.
It has that God's eye view from nowhere, and it can scan existing knowledge in order to give you an answer almost as an intuition because of the speed that you talk about, right? So it spits something out almost in the same way that we think philosophers generate ideas, as if we're just walking around having these thoughts without labor, without stress, without friction, without work. And so I see the move towards large language models, even though we do not talk about this in the book, as maybe suggesting that that myth that we do criticize in the book is not dying. It's just taking on a technological phase.
And I want to add also that, thinking about, the view from nowhere, or the idea of like AI is a pure ideology machine. Basically, it's data, it's obscuring the data sets that it's working from, the thinkers that it's drawing from, and producing, again, the statistical average of sort of the given, right? Or whatever it was given, as if it were like from nowhere, spoken with the voice of God. And I think the uncritical, the way that it's just like, oh, just I have all this knowledge available. You actually don't, right? You don't have that available to you. It's a kind of pure ideology machine, and it obscures its origins. It obscures the labor, the sort of environmental and technological toll, where you have these Silicon Valley saying AI is inevitable, and so we need to figure out energy infrastructure around this supposition. Like, there's like an entire material substrate for ChatGPT, both in terms of the data it's drawing from, as well as the data centers that actually exist in real communities, like sucking up their water, just it's taking their electricity in order to generate a profit. And so like ChatGPT is a pure ideology. Anyway.
Okay, no, that's outstanding. I apologize if this isn't close to your book. I see it as close to your book. I think that so what I hear you saying is something like this new myth that we need to cultivate is going to have to be up against the things that you just said in regard to technology. So it's not simply the case that technology is sweeping through, and so therefore these myths have to change and they have to somehow match up with the technology that's sweeping through. We actually need to, yeah.
I'm actually really glad you're asking these questions, because one of the things that really was bad about the timing of our book is it happened right as the accelerate. Obviously LLMs have been, I think, for a while, and but the acceleration of that and the kind of very obvious political crisis of higher education seems to make our book perhaps a little bit irrelevant. But I actually think it's the opposite. I think our book is more relevant than ever, especially for these kinds of questions about subjectivity, about the process of writing, about the nature of myth and ideology. But it still seems a little removed, right? So I actually appreciate that you're asking questions that we don't directly address in the book, but I think you're right, are relevant to it.
Yeah, and at the end of the book, we talk about concrete myths that we want to push for, and that we want to encourage philosophers to use in their self-interpretation as a way of breaking out of this stronghold that the current mythic order has over our imagination. And I think this goes back to the discussion that we had at the very beginning of our interview about what myths are liberatory and what myths are ideological. And my answer that it's always relative to material conditions on the ground. And right now, large language models are changing the material conditions on the ground. Yes. And so, for example, one of the things that we talk about at the end of the book is how should philosophers think about solitude versus sociality? For a long time, we've thought about the philosopher as a solitary figure who is just in their room like Descartes, having ideas that are spinning out of their mind in a complete vacuum. And we call for a social model of philosophy where philosophy is dialogical, it is conversational, it happens in public space through the encounters of multiple minds. Here, in connection to ChatGPT, for example, there are two ways this could go. And again, it highlights the contextuality of myths. It could be that in a world of ChatGPT, where everything is fast and automatic and done by a computer, maybe there's a value to the solitude myth that we criticize, because solitude is about working slowly through your own thought process without external aids. So maybe in 5 years, maybe in 3 years, or in 20 years, that will be a radical position because of the way in which technology will have changed the landscape. Similarly, we talk about the importance of thinking about philosophers not just as researchers, but as teachers. And teaching is, as we put it in the book, a social relation. It has to happen between two subjects that ask questions back and forth and that arrive at a position where neither of them could have on their own in separation. And I think understanding that also helps us understand not only why ChatGPT can't think, but also why it cannot teach. And so the increasing reliance in higher education on these large language models as if they're going to replace teachers in the near future. And I'm at an institution that just spent $17 million on buying students the latest, most powerful version of ChatGPT for them to do their work. The long-term game here, I do think, is a replacement of teachers and the proletarianization of teaching labor, where the idea is that why would you pay real people to do this work when ChatGPT can do it for free?
Yep, there it is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And to kind of go back actually to your question about solitude, one of the things that really strikes me about the role of technology is, you mentioned that maybe we kind of go back to this idea of the unaided self-contemplating, right? As a reaction against this sort of externalization of consideration of invention, et cetera. One thing about ChatGPT is it actually promotes radical solitude. It cuts people off from not just like talking to other people or talking to their teachers, but even just like reading something written by a person, right? The idea of like picking up an original text. So it's like, it cuts them off from like the historical voices that could be preserved, right, through reading. And it makes them really lonely. Like, it's striking. And I should rephrase it. Like, the loneliness epidemic has been a thing since long before technology, but it's exacerbating that particular process and actually making people feel like they're kind of these free-floating selves in a frictionless world, right? There's nothing that resists them. There's nothing that's outside of them, because you type it in, ChatGPT like spits it out for you in the form of like AI sludge. And that I think that actually is a radically solitary, atomized existence that doesn't even really have a world for itself, because a world is something that pushes back. A world is something that is unexpected, something that actually takes you outside of yourself into the realm of the social, into the realm of objects that don't just exist at your convenience. And I think this is creating like wildly stunted subjects, unsocial, asocial, anxious subjects. And I think, that would be why I may want to like stay away from, like, I think actually like that form of subjectivity is an intensification of the like the solitary philosopher who's just has the world in their brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's outstanding. Yeah. And, and I can't believe that I never asked the question, the Heideggerian question of, is the AI poor in world, right? That's outstanding. Thank you so much for saying that. So, so this is a question that it kind of doubles back in some ways to what we were talking about, but the question of coherence. So in some ways you had suggested, it seemed like it was, you suggested that coherence is a kind of myth, right? But when I'm listening, and maybe I'm wrong about that. I thought that I got that, but that when I'm listening to this idea of thinking and dialogical thinking and transformation that comes through dialogical thinking and so forth, that it involves I'm asking myself, what's the gestalt shift, so to speak, right? Like what's happening for these students that are causing them, because hey, I'm sure the biology professors are also pretty excited about the biologists, you know what I mean, right? So it's not just that we really think Plato's great or something. I feel like is it the case that there's a kind of coherence that is happening for them mentally, psychologically, so to speak, that is, perhaps, it brings its own affectivity with it, right? That suddenly it's like, oh, as I'm thinking about these things, I'm able to start to become clear. I can see, with my mind better or something like that. I mean, is that, but I guess the reason I'm bringing this up in this way is because I'm wondering, does coherence have to be a part of, I mean, can coherence persist after we remove the old myths, so to speak?
Could you define coherence? Because there's a couple of different ways one could cash out the term coherence, right? There's of course, coherence theory of truth, right? Our account of the world, does not contain contradictions and does an adequate job explaining phenomena. So we've got epistemic coherence, and then you have what we might call like a kind of psychic coherence, where you have like, you don't have a kind of radically divided subject. I guess I'm not sure. Like, could you clarify a little bit what you mean by coherence?
Absolutely, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you so much. So I would say, really, I really genuinely, sincerely would say both. And what I mean by
Mhm.
that is that, so it's like, you're sort of in the world, and you have these ideas over here, and I've got these ideas over here. I've never really juxtaposed them. I've never really
Mhm.
considered whether I can hold both of them, and so on and so forth,
Uh-huh.
right? So coherence to me is something like that. Is that like, oh well, if I believe these five different things, how do these five different things relate to each
Mhm.
other? And are there philosophers who have come before me who have sort of
Mhm.
laid the groundwork for this discussion? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Mhm. So like building a worldview in some sense that has a kind of like it hangs together, right? There's
Accept.
not
Yeah, no,
contradictory. Okay, maybe I'm
yeah,
just yeah.
yeah. No, I think
Mhm.
that's great. I would accept that 100%. That yes, that a coherent worldview. And so my question is that is part of the myth that you're critiquing the idea that the philosopher is one who has a coherent worldview, or that the philosopher is one who has some kind of a
Mhm.
privileged relation to a coherent
Mhm.
worldview?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I think I see where your question is coming from. So, in the myth of the philosopher as one of the things that is distinctive about this myth is this notion that to be a philosopher is to have a worldview, right? That one's voice speaks for, right? So you go to the philosopher and you have the Hegelian worldview, the Heideggerian worldview, the Platonic worldview, right? And part of so I think that is that where so if we do away with this notion that each philosopher is who they are by virtue of having this unique worldview, are we doing away with the notion of coherence entirely? Is that kind of the
You know,
question?
okay. So I apologize. I maybe what I could do at some point is like get a little bit more textual with this. I think it would take me too
Oh,
much time
sorry.
to
I
explain. No,
no
that's okay. What
worries.
I could do is I could actually say to you, when you said this, I got this idea, and I wanted to
Mhm.
ask about that. So I apologize. That my question isn't coherent enough, as it were. but but yes, I guess I'm trying to envision this new vision of the philosopher. And you know I guess on the one hand, um as some segue here, I'll say something like, I agreed so wholeheartedly with your comment about the adjunct relation to the university, that on the one hand, the university cannot survive. It cannot survive without the adjuncts. And yet on the other hand, they are just, I mean, it might as well be slave labor. It really might as well be slave labor. I mean, I don't know what your experiences with it have been like, but the people that I know, and myself included, the experience is 100% miserable. And the very people who, when they're taking your tuition money, are encouraging you are the same people who, when you're no longer giving them tuition money, will tell you that you are that you're sorry, that you're
Disposable.
dispensable. Yeah, that they can just, they'll throw you away, and it doesn't, they won't even think twice about it. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so I was speaking just from personal experience. A lot of the sections from the adjunct is from my experience both talking to and working as an adjunct, not even in the worst adjunct position, to be clear. Like my adjuncting has been like relatively like less bad, but even so, like that kind of psychic, like it's talk about coherence, like it's kind of a sort of classical like Marxist contradiction on some level, right? Like that it simultaneously depends upon the labor of these utterly hyper exploited, right, members of the university, or not even members of the university, and and they're performing like the core function that ostensibly the university is about, and at the same time they are completely degraded, like absolutely. But yeah, I'm not sure how to tie this to coherence. Forgive me. Maybe I'm also a little bit of an incoherent subject this morning.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Let me see what I can do here. I was kind of thinking about this, is that, so one of the things that it seems to me is that the perpetuation of these myths is also involves, just as much as the philosophy department itself cannot survive without the adjuncts. It seems to me that it also involves this idea that the philosophy department seems to be some kind of final arbiter or something like that. But at the same time, let me can I give you an anecdote here? Let me
Please.
so I had been teaching at a university as an adjunct with a master's degree. Then I completed my PhD. I went back to that same university and said, "Hey, I got my PhD now. If you got some classes to teach, I've got some time. I'd be happy to teach for you. But of course, I have my PhD now, so let's put me in the appropriate place in the pay scale, okay?" And of course, this was like, we're talking not a lot of money. We're talking poverty wages ultimately. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So. And no medical benefits whatsoever.
Nope.
And so the amount of money that I was asking for was exactly what the pay scale said. I mean, I wasn't saying give me more money or anything like that. And so whatever it was. So let's say I said, well, I need another $1,000 per class because the pay scale says I should be bumped up to another $1,000 per class, right? And they came back and they said, we'll give you 500. And I said, no, wait a minute. I said, I'm just, these are just numbers I'm using. I don't know. I don't even remember what the actual numbers were anymore. But so I said, well, wait a minute. What's going on here? It's like, is this some kind of negotiation? Like it's your pay scale, So I went to someone who, I'm trying not to put anybody on blast here, but it's like, so I went to somebody and I just said, hey, am I thinking about this the wrong way? Like, should I have asked for twice what I wanted so that I could get, just a whole thing. So is this, and I used the word negotiation. I said something like, is this some kind of, like highly sophisticated negotiation? And this is what they said to me. And this is, it just rippled, right? So what they said to me, they said, well, totally serious. And in a way, they're right. They're also correct. They said, you're not in a position to negotiate at all. And they said the university, and this is the words, right? The university knows how hard you worked to be able to do this. And so therefore, the university knows that you will continue doing this no matter what they pay you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was like, well, that's it. I'm not teaching here anymore. Just unbelievable stuff. So I guess my concern is something like this, right? And okay, thank you. Here it is. I didn't even see it myself, but I do now. So my concern is something like this, is that I do. And forgive me, I'm about to throw a whole bunch of things on a table. Feel free to speak to anything that you want to. But I feel like these are my prejudices, right? I believe that there is an authentic philosophical self. I believe that authentic philosophical self involves a kind of coherency, and I mean that in many ways. And I believe that there, and I'm sorry, but I believe that there is a legitimate canon in Western philosophy, and I hope that's not Stockholm syndrome. I don't believe that it is. But so having said all of that, my concern is something like this, right? Is that when corruption is corruption, right? And these things are falling apart, and they're corrupt and so forth. But what my concern is, and maybe it doesn't matter at all, but my concern is something like when we start saying things like the standards should be done away with, or that the ground on which the standard is based is really just arbitrary or something like that. What I have found is that even though, so we can have this conversation with each other, and we can all be in agreement that, hey, what you say about white male dominance is 100% correct. You are right. You're right. Your diagnosis is absolutely spot on. But the problem here, it seems to me, is something like this: is that we tend to think, and maybe this is because of the philosophical myths that we have been indoctrinated into, but we tend to think that stating the truth of this will somehow make it better. And what my experience has been that these people who are in power, what they just do is they say, oh, okay, so you're telling me that the next, I'm not trying to belittle anything or anyone, but you're telling me that the next thing has to be this shape, or the next thing has to be this color. Okay. And then they're like, now I'm just going to use those criteria to continue to exploit people and to continue to do whatever it is that I want to do anyway. Yeah.
This gets to the limits of remythologization section, actually, I think, because what you're describing is like one of the things that we were very careful about in the book is, just simply stating the problem or like saying it's ideological, right, does not actually change the fundamental material reality. And that's like part of what we are up against, right, as philosophers, as people who do genuinely care, like whatever our ontology is, about philosophy on some level, about education, about like knowledge, right, however one cashes out those terms. And simply saying if we think different, the world will be different, that is not what we're saying. In this respect, we're not idealists in that sense. So I mean, the question of like opening up to like broader struggle, I think, especially like labor struggle, what you described with your experience, like this is not a negotiation, like in some sense, right, they are objectively correct, right, in that we have no real material leverage except going outside of our discipline and working in some way to change the world. And that's maybe grandiose, but I think that has to happen not outside of philosophy in the sense of philosophers have nothing to add or have nothing to but we can't remain within the bounds of philosophical disciplinary precinct alone. Like it's impossible. We can't just sit here and say we're doing philosophy differently. Like we're going to have a wellness room and we're going to all just sort of think about how we can de-hierarchize it just by like thinking hard enough about it. That is not what happens, and that's why we're materialists at the end.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's also there's let's say happy-go-lucky optimistic view of philosophy, where philosophy is so powerful through its critical thinking that, as Rebekah said, philosophers can will the world otherwise by a pure act of thinking. And I think that ignores that philosophy, as we understand it as a discipline in a university, is nested in a set of power relations, right, that go way beyond philosophy. There is the politics of the university. There is the neoliberal takeover of higher education. Philosophy can't change those, but not by itself, certainly. And that's why so much of our emphasis in the book is to try to highlight the importance of, or a portion of the book is, it draws attention to the importance of philosophers joining struggles that are not just academic per se, because the experience of people in philosophy is not exhausted by their academic identity. And to bring it back to the issue of coherence, I think I'm going to try to give it a shot at maybe unifying some of the things that we've been talking about. Coherence, of course, can be a property of your worldview, of your web of beliefs, right? Like, do your beliefs generally make sense? That's what Rebekah alluded to with epistemic coherence as a theory of truth. Of course, in some way, Rebekah and I defend coherence in that way, right? We wrote a book that we hope is coherent, that holds from beginning to end. We're not out here openly advocating incoherent reasoning. But I think the kind of coherence that interests us more is the kind of psychic coherence, how subjects come to develop a unified sense of who they are. And much of our argument in the book is that the way in which academia and academic philosophy in particular are organized actually prevents people who are philosophers from achieving that kind of coherence about themselves, leading to fractured or alienated subjects. And it works very differently in the case of those of us like me who are in tenured positions and those who are in the adjuncting system. And like Rebekah. And so the difference there is that in some ways, those of us who enjoy the privileges, the material privileges of tenure, we suffer from a kind of incoherence in the sense of contradiction, right? Like we think we are this idealized philosopher speaking truth against the masses, when in reality, as we point out in the book, much of what we do on a day-to-day on the ground just doesn't even fit that idealized self-projection. In the case of adjuncts, however, the contradictions are rooted in material conditions, where even adjuncts who aspire to be that idealized philosopher, they are not even allowed to enter into that game of pretending to be the philosopher, because they are constantly reminded of their excluded status, right? If we think of the ideal philosopher as this person who has a lot of free time to engage in thinking and research and publishing, well, guess what? You can't do that when you're working at 4 different universities making $2,000 per class per semester. You can't do that when you don't even have an office on campus, because you're not allowed to be like given a permanent place on university grounds. You can't do that when your department, despite the best intentions of your colleagues, constantly reminds you that you have to leave the faculty meeting because the next discussion points are not really for you to hear, unfortunately. And so there is a sense of contradiction and incoherence that we're trying to uncover in philosophical subjectivity, but that works very differently depending on what material position. And that's why we talk about not just material and political exclusion, we also talk about mythic exclusion. Adjuncts are excluded from the very myth, from those idealized projections that those of us with mythic access, because we have material access, love to think that we are constantly increasingly approaching as time goes by.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that, one of the things we want to stress is we're not advocating for the adjunctification of everything, right? Like that, therefore we'll all like recognize the contradiction. It's rather we're pointing out this fissure, this like both mythic and, as David put it, like material exclusion, and how it actually kind of loosens up, right? A kind of this picture of the philosopher. Like it allows for new possibilities, different approaches. Like, and this is, again, the point is not to make everyone an adjunct, right? Because adjuncts like see things more clearly. That's not the point. We're not trying to, wholly like do away with, that. We want to do away with the order, but we're not trying to like immiserate everyone so that we all can see the truth or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's excellent. I think I guess my misunderstanding was I didn't, I wasn't thinking that you were grounding the mythology in the material practices as strongly as you are. I guess I excuse me, I was still holding out some some idea that that the myth that philosophers may hold for themselves is related to something other than the material conditions. So that was yeah. So
well, I think I think maybe for us there isn't such a thing as other than the material conditions, right? There's just the material conditions of the present and those of the past. So when Plato gives us a certain image of the philosopher, or when Kant talks about the philosopher, or when Heidegger talks about the act of philosophizing, and they wrote books about that, for us those are material practices, right? The act of doing philosophy, writing books. And so even though we really emphasize our materialism throughout the book, because we're talking about myths and often that just puts people in a way of thinking that's more idealistic, we do see myths as material ways, they're material practices that people use to make sense of who they are and to carve a place for themselves in the world. So yes, we are material, but our sense of materialism includes discursive practices. And so it encompasses myth within it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So just as a quick follow-up question, but when you talk about and I think again you are correct. You're both right. You're both correct. So but when you talk about things like what I want to say is something like maybe you're 100% correct about the material, but what about the question of power? And the reason that I asked the question of power is because, as you said in your book, and I had full experience of this firsthand as well. When I taught at one of the universities, they said, "Hey, we want you." I thought this is very interesting, right? They said, well, we want you to teach in 2 places simultaneously. And the way that we're going to have you teach in 2 places simultaneously is we're going to telecast, whatever word, we're going to telecast you into this other, it gets worse. We're going to telecast you into this other classroom, right? So now we're paying one teacher to teach on 2 campuses. But beyond that, I had to sign an agreement that while this is being telecasted, it's being recorded.
No.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
So that they can then use it in the future without paying you.
They can then use it. Yes, correct. Yep. So that's what I'm trying to say is that it's like, well, hey, the guy, I really am not, I don't want to put anybody on blast, but let's put it this way. There's a guy in Ohio running a university who's making almost $1 million a year. And I'm sure maybe in California and on the East Coast, maybe making $1 million a year to run a university is no big deal. But so then this guy's giving an interview saying that he cares about all of his students. And this is, it's one of the biggest universities in Ohio. It's like, that's got to be a rhetorical statement. I mean, how, right? And then all the while they're implementing these mechanisms to eliminate the teachers, so that the only thing that you're going to have is the bureaucrats at the top cashing checks. I mean, so I guess what I'm trying to say is something like, well, I don't know that. I mean, forgive me again. Hey, I'm not in agreement. I'm sorry. I'm not in disagreement with you, and I'm not a Freudian anymore. So I'm not in disagreement with you. I think that what you're saying about these gender lines and these race lines, and you are correct. They're all correct, but I don't know. I don't know what the answer is in terms of, it's like, I saw this in so many places. It's like you go into these conversations about who should be hired at a place, and they say, well, I mean, everything is just an excuse after the fact to do whatever it is that they wanted to do anyway, and that's power, and that's power, right? So I'm sorry, So I don't know what to do about that. I don't know what to do about that though. Yeah.
I mean, I would, dismantling the neoliberal university and building something better is something I think can agree we all want. And what do we do? I don't know, smash the looms.
Count me in.
I don't want to say anymore. Don't want to
Sure.
Anyway, but I think that is power. Like, that's actually like material concentrations of capital, like the way that like labor is related to, the university is basically a hedge fund with a polite fiction of a university attached to it. Like, I mean, coming from like more elite universities anyway, and like the function of the university broadly, like these are all things that are important to consider. And like, as philosophers, we have to recognize that this is the world we live in. And those of us like I who are more peripheral to the university or peripheral to philosophy, it's obvious. But I think in philosophy itself, it's like sometimes, especially in more elite departments, they sort of float above the wheel of samsara, or think that they do.
Well, and I think our book also gives us some tools for thinking about this problem, right? The problem of power, because power is a relation, as we've learned from Michel Foucault, and it's a relation that doesn't always have to be top down. It can be horizontal, and it can happen in insidious ways, in the smallest crevices of your social life. And one of the problems that we talk about in the book is that because philosophers, we have this notion of what philosophy is that precludes us from thinking of ourselves as workers. Keeps us from looking around us and seeing the power that is suffocating us all around, right? And that includes both the power that we submit to, that we are complicit with, but also the power that we exercise over one another, depending on the specific positions of power that we occupy. What are those positions of power that we occupy? Sometimes it can be the fact that I might be the chair in my department, and I exercise power not only over my colleagues, but also over the sustenance of like the actual job, the survival conditions of adjuncts. It could be that I hold more institutional prestige, and so people are more willing to collaborate with me on co-author projects, so on and so forth. And so in the chapter of the book entitled The Alienated Philosopher, we talk about this problem that philosophers, we have this idea that philosophy is a mission. It's like a gift or a vocation. And so we ought to be thankful that we get to teach and do research, rather than understanding that it is an occupation, and as such, it is mired in relations of power. And that's why we ultimately think that the profession of philosophy is so problematically depoliticized, because you have all these subjects who are, like dragging power relations everywhere they go. Don't think, often we think we're immune to that, and there is nothing more ideological than thinking that you are free from power, that you've already been liberated and don't have to think about that.
Yeah, and I think you're clearly invested, right, in a kind of, and like, to be clear, like, I on some level like still hold on to an idea of philosophy as having a kind of mission character, or having like a possibility in it, and obviously we're invested in it for this reason. And if you want, whether like we could like quibble about the ontology of the philosophical self, or what philosophical insight or coherence is, but I think like to even create the conditions for the possibility of that realization, you need liberation, like genuine liberation.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, if I could, and I, again, sincerely am asking you this question, help me understand where I'm wrong with this, right? With what I'm about to say to you, because I truly believe it. But I am open to being re-educated here. I mean, sincerely. So one of the things that I found in your book, and this is pretty standard nowadays, I feel, is the idea, and correct me if I'm using incorrect terms here, but this idea that meritocracy is, it's part of the myth. It's kind of an illusion. It's used to exploit people, maybe even. I'm not certain if that's in the book. Okay, that's in the book too. So, but from my point of view, and so here's my question to you. But from my point of view, we're talking about power, and we're talking about people who are just trying to sort of get their way, and it just, I guess my question is something like this. It seems to me that when we think about the question of merit, we think about the question of meritocracy, that I understand concerns about biases all along the way. But the problem seems to me is that once you do away with merit, then there's, you're almost, it seems to me, you're almost just totally at the mercy of the people who have the power, right? I actually am in a publication. I'm trying to be careful here. I'm not trying to point anybody out, but so I used to work with a professor, and she told me that, and this was outside of, this was a blind spot for me, but she told me that one of the experiences that she had was that she was constantly being invited to give these lectures and be a part of these hiring processes, but that she quickly realized that they weren't actually considering her at all, that she, and these are her words, not mine, that she was like a kind of token, so that they could say that, look, we have a female candidate that we were considering, and so on and so forth, right? And so again, for me, it's power. The problem is these people in power. And to my mind, and I'm open that maybe I'm wrong, but to my mind, the only way that we can hold these people that have the power accountable is if there is some actual external objective standard. And I understand that there's biases involved in that process, but I just, there have been some things that have been said, not by the two of you, but there have been things that have been said, for example, by the American Philosophical Association, in the effort to reject merit and in the effort to reject meritocracy, that are just, they're so absurd that they end up treating people as though they are just, chess pieces to be placed in certain places. Forgive me, I don't want to rant here. I'll just say one last thing. Sorry. So I I have some very close friends who are attorneys for the Department of Education. The U.S. Department, well, what used to be the U.S. Department of Education. And when I have a conversation, when I had a conversation, this is super fascinating to me. I'll be very, very quick. So I say to them, hey, how is it the case that the American Philosophical Association can in print say things like, we need to go find African-American females and turn them into philosophy professors, right? How is it that the American Philosophical Association can say something like that? First off, all these assumptions of like, what makes you think that being a philosophy professor is so special? Maybe African-American females have better things to do than being a philosophy professor. And then these very intelligent people say to me, and this is a verbatim quote, these very intelligent people say to me, well, we just need to get the statistics right. We just need to get the statistics right.
Mhm.
What are you talking about? So forgive me. So now I'm drifting a little bit, but so anyway, I just feel like meritocracy is what this is about, right? Is that when you say that, we're trying to get the statistics right or something like that, or I can't hire you because you're not a woman, or I can't hire you because of, I feel like what we've really done is we've just opened the floodgates for the people in power to do whatever they want.
Okay. Yeah. So one thing I will say very quickly is, like, David and I are both pretty critical of like the kind of superficial diversification language. I think we even talk about this briefly in one of the chapters, where it becomes like a numbers game, where it becomes a kind of tokenizing gesture, right? Or it's kind of like merely aesthetic without like, and like we point out that like we actually don't see that as necessarily a bad thing inherently. We can talk about that in a minute. But we're after something a little bit more fundamental that is upstream, right, of the demographic, like the clear like demographic issues in philosophy. David, do you want to take it away from there?
Well, let me gather my thoughts for a hot second, because I think my thinking is going in three directions here. One is that it might be helpful to differentiate merit from meritocracy, right? That merit is about a kind of entitlement that's based on effort, and I don't think anybody in this room would, in this Zoom room where we're recording, would want to do away with the concept of merit altogether. Meritocracy, however, is a way of organizing society where you use the concept and sometimes the illusion of merit in order to legitimize existing power relations that keep people out. So it's actually a retroactive maneuver that we're often criticizing in the book. So it's not so much the idea that some people might have some merit in connection to certain things than others, but rather this backwards maneuver where you say, oh, well, let me look at the social field. Who has power? Well, those people must have it because they merited it. So they must have done something to deserve it. And so that's the ideological component of meritocracy. The second, the second thought I'm having here is that even though we might differentiate between merit and meritocracy, there's still a critique to be launched against the very notion of merit, especially as it plays out on the ground in academic spaces, because we know that there are a lot of obstacles along that path of intellectual formation that we talked about a little while ago that keep a lot of people out of the mere possibility of being in a philosophy PhD program. In the book, we talk about class as one of these determinants. We talk about the class hemorrhage. Universities are terrible at retaining and training people from working class backgrounds. And by the time those students, and Rebekah and I were two instantiations of, like the ones who made it, by the time you make it into a PhD program, then you have to deal with this elitism that you're not really sure how to deal with. You don't know the norms of engagement. And there is a lot of research, sociological research, that shows that the people who become professors in philosophy, by and large, tend to come from middle and upper middle class upbringings. And there are people who afforded to go to elite institutions for undergrad and to Ivy or Ivy League-esque institutions afterwards. And so then you end up with a very specific pool of candidates at the very end, that professor that's standing in front of the classroom, that there are exceptions, of course, to the rule, but by and large, the patterns are very clear. And so, unfortunately, we conflate termination as in like finishing that long process of formation with merit. It's not to say that those individual people didn't work hard to get there. It's just that many people worked hard and didn't get there, and many more were not even given the shot to work very hard.
Yeah. And I agree with everything David just said. And I mean, the converse of this also is like, this idea that we internalize, and I think this produces a lot of anxiety and a lot of, like, frankly, neuroses among people who don't make it, right? Where it becomes like either like a kind of like, I failed, right? I didn't make it to the tenure track position. And there's a kind of idea that, like, I just couldn't hack it, right? And you see this like internalized idea of like merit where, like, I justly should be in that position, but I'm not. And it kind of like creates like a lot of like insanity among people who kind of wash out. But yes, that was just a minor comment there.
No. I love this. I love this. Thank you so much for being candid with me about this. I mean, I sincerely, deeply appreciate this. But so if I could ask, just to help me get a little bit clearer here too. So I actually agree. So this idea that if merit equals effort, absolutely, that's a problem, right? And then because that perpetuates what you talk about in the book in terms of just people burning themselves out and just thinking that they have to be as productive as possible and things of that nature. But I guess what when I think of merit, and I recently had a kind of exchange with someone who takes a very French approach to existentialism and was saying that merit is like the worst thing on the planet, and the idea of merit is the worst thing on the planet because it oppresses people and so on and so forth. But what I'm trying to get at is something like this, is something like if you say something like, and not you too, but if someone who is criticizing merit says something like, well, it's not fair to everyone. Some people from certain backgrounds are not going to be able to understand Kant, and so therefore we got to throw Kant out of the canon. And then then that's just a slippery slope. And then the next thing hey, it's really. I mean, there was a moment. I don't know. I think that maybe our time frames are a little off from one another, right? So I think there was a moment when the American Philosophical Association was very open and brazen about some of the things that they were saying, and I'm not so sure. I don't know where you guys were. I don't know where the two of you were in time when the American Philosophical Association was doing that and saying those things, but one of the things that, they were openly saying this in writing, is that we need to come up with African philosophies that don't involve Aristotle. Like we got to get rid of Aristotle, right? And this idea that, for example, the principle of non-contradiction is somehow racist, or that the principle of non-contradiction is somehow racially biased. And my thought is that no one outside of philosophy, if a lawyer heard that, no one outside of philosophy would even take that seriously. That it would just be considered an absurd utterance, right? And so getting back to all of this, it's like, well, as you systematically pull things from the canon and justify it by saying that there's an unfair bias, or it excluded these people or something like that what you then end up with is just this kind of relative free-for-all that's just determined by things like, and this is how it gets hijacked, right? Just determined by things like, well, what do the students want to hear? What is going to get us the most likes and the most subscribers and the most tuition money? And let's go in the classroom and say those things, right? And forgive me, the last piece to this is that when I hear merit, and David was just commenting on this idea of feeling inadequate or insecure in the face of elitism. But see, I feel as though merit is the really perhaps the only means to combat that, right? So the idea is to say something like, look, We both have PhDs in philosophy. You are uber rich. You know what I mean? Like you come from a family of professors and so on and so forth. And I don't know either one of your backgrounds. I'm just, hypothesizing this person that I'm going to critique, right? But the reality of the situation is that I know Plato better than you. Game over. I don't care where you vacation during the winter. You know what I mean? Like, or I know Kant better than you. And so therefore, and so I see that as merit, right? But when you allow people to say, you allow philosophers to say, I don't need to know Plato, and I don't need to know Aristotle, and I don't need to know Kant, because it's, you're a racist if you like those guys or something like that, or you are fetishizing them or something like that. Like, I think that's a deep mistake, and it undermines the very common ground that you can compete on. So forgive me. Yeah, I'd love to hear
a couple of
your
things
thoughts.
immediately come to mind. First of all, I don't see Aristotle and Kant going away, and I wouldn't want that either. Like, I am not a canon abolitionist in that sense, one.
Okay.
Two, I don't, you talk about this like in a way that suggests a kind of inherent competitiveness. And to be very clear, when I spoke about, when David spoke about like feeling out of place, it had nothing to do with, at least on my part, my estimation of my knowledge of Kant or my ability to do philosophy. It was a culture thing, not an intellectual insecurity thing.
Okay.
So, in terms of like a lot of what we talk about like merit and the kind of class hemorrhage. It's not like to do with, admitting students that are intellectually unprepared. It really has to do with sort of invisible rules that have more to do with like the social rituals and norms. David, do I speak for you on this point?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, and we'd write about this in the book, right? That there are these invisible obstacles that prevent even really interested, talented undergrads from ever reaching a stage in which they can even consider themselves as candidates for the profession. And so there, the concept of merit, I mean, the thing about the concept of merit is that it's not something that you can give yourself, right? Like, you cannot give yourself a meritocratic, like, I mean, maybe you can psychologically, but merit is something that is socially recognized in you by others through opportunities, through interactions. And so maybe I know Plato better than, whatever the guy that vacations in Aspen, but the guy who vacations in Aspen is the one that got that job at Yale, while I have been, maybe one of those statistics of people who is recruited just for the interview to beef up the statistics internal to their department, but I'm never really considered because of these hidden rules where people meet maybe candidates like Rebekah, like me, like many other people. It's not that they have a consciously like, oh, no women in the department, or like, oh, there goes another brown person. Sometimes
they might. Yeah, but I'm sorry.
Maybe. And to be honest, I've been the recipient of overt acts of racism on the job market, but sometimes it's also a very subtle judgment about the question of fit. And we talk about the concept of fit in the book quite a bit, where sometimes people say, oh, will they fit in the culture of our department? And once you start really digging, because it's such a big concept, once you start really realizing what that refers to, it's like, oh, are they the kind of people that we feel like we have a lot to share, a lot in common with? Are they the kind of people that we can identify with and imagine envisioning at our dinner parties? Those sorts of questions start emerging. And that's where, however faithful or fictitious my own self-assessment about how well I know Plato might be, and independently of how certain I am that I've done my work, it will not change the fact that the power is in the hands of a hiring committee that has a very specific class, racial, gendered composition. And so in those cases, I think when people talk about the diversification of the discipline, and I mean, to be clear, you and I probably disagree on the question of the canon. And I've written about that in another place, right? About the politics of canonization. Why is it that some people become canonized, but others not? And I think Rebekah and I come from a place where we both went to a graduate program that specializes in the Western canon, in the history of the canon, because we loved that field. We love that field. That's what we wanted to be trained in. But the power given to that particular iteration of the canon is disproportionate to all the possibilities of what a canon in philosophy could be, I think I would be very critical of somebody who says, oh, I need to know nothing about Plato. But how come we're not critical of somebody who doesn't feel the same way about Confucius? How come we don't have the same view about somebody who literally knows nothing about Africana philosophy or Asian philosophy or Latin American philosophy? And so here we're not even talking about gaps in one proper name. We're talking about gaps in entire continents. And for some reason in our discipline, that doesn't even register as problematic. It just registers as the default.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely. And I think, this kind of goes back to the like moving away from policing the boundaries of the discipline. So, canon becomes like really contentious when like the possibilities for what counts as philosophy are very narrow. Like if you open up, right, what counts as philosophy, and we talk about this a lot, I think, in the book, in terms of like thinking about like how could we read other things, like additional things, like not just additional things, but like thinking about like a very broad conception of what even counts as philosophy. I think in this respect, it's not just a matter of like excavating figures that were overlooked, although we do agree with that kind of project as well, but also expanding it, right? Like not just in terms of like geographical location, culture, but also in terms of like what is under consideration. And so it becomes less a turf war, right?
Sure. No, I deeply appreciate both of your answers. Thank you so much for that. So I guess this is great. If it's okay to say one more thing about this, because I feel like we're really getting clear on this. I don't disagree with actually anything that either one of you just said. And so I guess the concern that I have, and I have a question that I'd like to lead off with, and the question is something, and I'm being sincere with you. I'm sincerely asking you this question: is that should we do away with grades? Right? Should we stop grading people? And the reason that I think that this is a good question to lead into what I'm saying here is because it seems as though the very basis on which we are grading people, it reeks of meritocracy. Sorry, it reeks of merit, right? Like you need to earn this. Like you can earn this. And I don't think that the question is that to my mind at least, it's not simply about effort, right? Right. It's not simply about effort. So there has to be some sort of structure that is unique to the discipline of philosophy. Otherwise, there's really no discipline of philosophy. But so my question being something like, is that there may be a contradiction there, right? That we're grading people, but then we're also telling people that that our grading is biased and unfair. But if we stop grading people, then what have we become? Help me out here.
I have so many thoughts about this. I will take the lead on this. So yes, grading. I could not care less about grades. And let me provide some context for this. I went to an undergraduate that was very, very, got a scholarship kid at a very hippy dippy like liberal arts college that gave me an excellent education and was grades optional. I never thought about grades once in my undergraduate. I didn't care. I mean, I did opt for grades because I thought I might want to go to grad school, but like it was not a motive. Like grades have nothing to do with why I thought I would be like wanted to go into philosophy. It wasn't because I got A's in my philosophy papers. I did, but I didn't care about that. And that's just from my personal experience. And I'm going to like translate this into a broader context. So what is a university degree? Mm-hmm. What is the student's understanding of the function of a university degree? I think part of the tension that we're having here is the distinction between like university as a credentialization process in the formation of a professional who has certain class aspirations to be a doctor, a lawyer, and or wants to get a better paying job. At this point, like having an undergraduate degree, even as is like just necessary for having a dignified life or having a salary, having like insurance, right? So you have a wider swath of the population who's going to the university, right, than ever before. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think the expansion of public universities in the States was a very good thing. And So when we come to the question of grades and the question of merit, it's, students care a lot about grades. And, they have a heavy psychic investment in grades. And I actually think that that is a problem. And I think that that reflects the kind of status anxiety that is linked up with getting an education. And so when I give a student a grade, they see it as I am A, I am B, I am C. And to me, that grades are kind of a distraction in that way, because to me, what I'm interested in is the student learning and thinking. I want to help them form into a kind of philosophical subject, again, to use this kind of very fraught term. But I mean, that's genuinely what I want to do. I want them to think about the world as being made, as not simply existing, to have them question things. And to me, my frustration with grades and grade inflation is very real. It's a constant war where you're like, okay, I've got this student who's going to kick up a fuss if they get an A-, standards for grades have been dropping, but I kind of don't care, because what to me a philosophical education has nothing to do with grades. And yes, I'm always aggravated to kind of feel like I'm fighting a one-woman war against grade inflation, but I actually don't care about grades. So, I'm not interested in evaluating a student in terms of you must be this high to enter, because that's credentialization. That's absolutely the kind of idea of a sort of instrumentalization of education itself, which is broad and is institutionally true, but is not one that I have a lot of investment in. I'm frustrated by grade inflation. Do I think a lot of students get better grades than they technically earn? Yeah, that's true, but I also that's not why I care about education. I think one of my favorite students I've ever had was a student who was just sometimes didn't show up to class, kind of didn't submit things, never complained about grades, got a B- or something, but it was one of the most genuinely intellectually curious students I've ever met. He sent me an email saying, reading Descartes in your class ruined my summer. Thank you.
That's a compliment.
Oh, absolutely.
And, but I also think I think we have to also be honest about just how fraught grading is, right? Anybody who has taught a class and been in front of the classroom knows the anxiety of feeling like, even if you want to be fair in the technical sense of the term, it's impossible to know what fairness means. So how do I grade that really smart student who will write an A paper, but I know they half-assed it just because they rely on their clear writing skills?
Interesting. Yeah.
Or the student who is struggling with their grammar, but clearly there's a lot of effort, it's just not coming out clearly. What grade do they deserve? How do I grade an ESL student who is writing in their third or fourth language? How do I grade students who haven't been there but have been doing the work versus those who have been there but haven't been doing the work? And so my own view about grading has changed significantly because of my shifting institutional location. So Rebekah and I went to a kind of Ivy-esque program for our PhD, Emory University. And those are the students of the 1%, the children of the 1% who are students there. And they are professional grade negotiators. They will battle with you.
They'll call their lawyer.
Yeah, or they will say, you need to speak to my father, or I will. I got a couple of emails when I was teaching there that said, I'm speaking to my dad's friend, the dean or whatever, because I'm unhappy with my A-. And so there you see that emphasis on professionalization, on accreditation, on credentialing. And I was one of those students when I was young. I was like, I want straight A's because it proves something about myself. I'm talking about when I was in elementary school, middle school, and high school. And seeing that on speed really changed my view of grading. And now that I teach at a state university in San Francisco, where all of my students are working class students who are here for, in general, they're not here because they're going to go get a PhD or go to med school. Many of them are here because they want to improve their life or because they want personal growth and psychological expansion. And many of them tell me, can I meet with you to talk about my paper? I'm not contesting the grade. I just want to talk. And it has crystallized for me that value of education and that mission of higher education that Rebekah is alluding to, where I no longer see the point of grading, but it is a reality that we have to do. And so, yes, in fact, next week I have to submit grades, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's outstanding. That's outstanding. If I could just add one thing, and I think you both actually already gestured toward this, if not spoke to it. But I had a student once say something to me, and I felt like it just flipped a light switch for me. It actually really, I mean, well, here I'm still thinking about it. I'm about to share the story with you. But I was teaching in Texas, and I was just, I don't know, walking to a class or something. I ran into one of my students or former students. I don't even remember, but I knew this person, and I must have been waiting on something because I'm standing around. And so I engage in a conversation with this person, and they said something about how they had just received like a B or a B plus or something. Let's just say B, make it easier. So that they had just received a B, right? And, and I immediately came back with, just this reassuring kind of thing, and they were actually talking about their psychology professor who had given them a B. And what they said back to me, like, it was like one of these peak moment experiences for me. They said, well, that professor knows that by giving me that grade that I will have to pay for grad school. And I thought, that thought never crossed my mind. You know what I mean? That my grades are influencing what the money that these people are going to have to come up with. And, and as we've been saying, working class individuals are going to have more difficulty coming up with that money then. So anyway, so that really affected me in terms of thinking about grading people. And, I too could say several things about grading, but I don't want to go too far afield here. So I'll just leave it at that. But I still want to say something like, I think our best way to combat power in these university situations is that, and I'll put it this way, we should agree on some kind of a standard and then hold ourselves to it. And if you want that standard to include Confucius or whoever else, that's great. I'm all for it. But to say that we cannot have a standard because having standards is somehow, white or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, I think we're being exploited big time because we're opening the door then to just be exploited big time. Worse than if we had standards. Maybe that's, forgive me.
Yeah. I mean, I would want to know who says we can't have any standards, right? Like who's openly voicing that view.
Got a book right here. Yeah.
And so, unless that is a critique of standards' role in standardizing experiences, right? Because there's a legitimate criticism to be made about the fact that nowadays, when we use the word standard, what we mean is a measurable, something that is quantifiable. That's why grades are so appealing, because they have a numerical value, right? Like, and then you have a GPA, and it allows us to create a ranking of who's the best and who's the worst. But there are ways of thinking about standards where it's a much more pluralistic understanding. Different people can have different standards that they're aspiring to. Maybe one student is aspiring to go to med school. Maybe we give them the option of grades. Maybe another student just wants to learn philosophy and they don't need the grading option, as in Rebekah's undergrad experience. And also, not every standard can or should be graded. If your standard is personal growth, it's really hard to know how to give somebody that policing power, because let's be honest, I'm going to speak psychoanalytically about myself only. I don't mean to speak for anybody else in higher education. I think there is a perverse pleasure that we professors get from grading because it is an expression of power. And, we try to be fair. We all have, we do want our students to succeed. But sometimes there is that little thrill of like, yeah, you didn't do what I told you to do. You get a C. Fuck off. Like, and
oh, sorry.
He's a real professor. That's a real professor right there.
Yeah, sorry about that. But I think we also have to be honest about the fact that we part of our training has been to internalize that policing function where we're somehow gatekeeping whatever it is, merit, learning. And I think that's something that we probably have to therapize a little bit in ourselves individually. And it's something that I struggle with now. It's not something that I've overcome, because I sometimes still have that impulse of leaning on a power that I know I have over students. And I hate that I have that power, because that power in the grand scheme of things sometimes just keeps students in their place. It disciplines, like in a negative sense of the term.
Mm-hmm. And I'll also add that, like, especially as like, I'm still teaching at, a relatively elite university, and I feel very, very powerless. Like, I don't have, voting rights in the faculty senate. I'm constantly feel like, frustrated by the like entitlement of my students because of this particular demographic that I teach. Like, just like the sense of like, especially since I'm teaching first year writing, which is seen as like just kind of a, I won't swear on your podcast, BS type of class that like is just like, I show up, I pretend to learn something, and you give me a grade dispenser, right? And so like what David's describing, I'll only speak for myself as well. It's like, yeah, it's very, it's like you're going to complain to the dean, you're going to like be like, there's going to be no consequences when you cheat. Like, you're all doing ChatGPT all the time, and I know it, and we're kind of doing this Potemkin thing. And when I can catch you at your made up, hallucinated citations, I got you. I nailed you. And I just submitted like a 10-page honor council report. So, I understand very much that. And to me, like, I'm a university abolitionist. Like, I actually don't care like in an intellectual level about the credentialization, this like ABCD. Like, what I want to see is like genuine intellectual curiosity on the part of my students. And to me, like, the whole structure of education is antithetical to that. And that to me is the more fundamental problem, rather than kind of holding the line on like academic standards, which, and again, I do see the like decline of academic standards, but I kind of both do and don't care. And I think that there's, the more important question here is, I don't think holding up like standards of some kind of like rigor, however we define it, is actually going to like unseat the power structure. It's just going to make students not take our classes. And I guess, students who do like might feel like they the rigor has given them a sense of like, I guess, confidence. But for me, more fundamentally, it's the way that the system itself is strategically designed to make deeply uncurious and uncritical subjects. And that's more troubling to me than grading.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, and I believe that I agree with you 100% about that. I guess what I'm trying to get at is something like this, right? Like, I was talking to this one fella, and he said that they have these fundraisers, like, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can pick any political thing you want, right? So this is they're having this they're throwing a fundraiser at a party against some political thing. Let's just put it that way, right? And then they invite judges, like literal actual judges, to these fundraisers. And this guy, who he said, he doesn't understand why they even do this. He said because a judge cannot predetermine the outcome of a case. Right. Like, so, I mean, this is just sort of obvious, right? Like, the judge can't say, oh, this case involves abortion, you're guilty, right? Like, whatever, this case involves XYZ, this person's guilty. I don't need to hear any arguments. I know they're guilty. So, but I feel like that perversion has crept into academia. And so for example, I'm trying to be, I'm not trying to be offensive in any way, shape, or form here. I don't want to offend anyone, but to say something like, we're going to hire somebody from Montana, and then to do it before you even get any applications of anybody from Montana, there's something suspect about that. Like, I don't, and please allow me just to add this last piece to this, is that, like, hey, and you, the two of you said this to me, so I think I'm just saying something back to you that you said to me, right? Was that you, Dr. Spera, is saying that you feel as though you feel these exclusions and this, that, and the other, right? Hey, I read your book. I mean, this is outstanding work. I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you, and I'm like, oh my goodness. I mean, the both of you are clearly, I mean, I've been around the block a few times. Like, I don't need a lot of time to figure out who I'm talking to. You know what I mean? And the both of you are like, I mean, wow. You know what I mean? Like really excellent. No, sincerely, right? But now let's, you know, I mean, that's obvious to me. That's obvious to me. But let's put that in the context and then say, well, you're excluded, Rebekah, because you're not from Montana. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like, well, that's
let me say just
really
one little
fair.
one little detail. I mean, I appreciate the kind words about us and our work.
Sure.
Let's also just put it on the table that neither Rebekah nor I have been hired by a philosophy department, and we've been in the market for a very long time.
Oh, I guess okay.
And so, you know, when we were talking about exclusion, and when I alluded to our experience in philosophy, this is a theme that many people have written about, that many voices in philosophy, including leading voices, we're not leading voices, but like when I'm talking about, like, you know, people who have like a Wikipedia entry, you know, like, if you have
leading voices, you are.
Sorry. But I mean, big
people
names.
whose first Google search is not rate my professor.
Yeah, exactly. No, when we're talking about big names in in various philosophical subfields, have their home outside of philosophy departments, and you know, often people are puzzled by that, like, oh, I didn't realize that this person is not a philosopher, but they previously read them as philosophical until they learned about their institutional affiliation. And so when we talk about exclusion, we don't feel as if the exclusion is not, how can I say this, intellectual. It's not that Rebekah and I don't feel like philosophers. You know, we identify as philosophers publicly in our work and in our profession. But those material conditions that we talk about at length in the book, like, we've lived them in various ways. And so when there are discussions about changing hiring practices, we also have to contextualize those changes. And those changes and the plea for recruiting more, let's say, you know, you mentioned students of color into the discipline, doing summer programs to try to incentivize people to apply to graduate schools, being more attentive to the pool of candidates. All of that comes from a world where, as we note in the first chapter of our book, where we go into great detail about the statistics of the demographics of professional philosophy, philosophy remains one of the most conservative disciplines in all of the humanities when it comes to diversification. Women in general, especially white women, have made some progress in the last few decades, but especially when you turn to race and when you turn to other categories, certainly when you turn to class, philosophy is still stuck in the 1950s and 60s as far as its population is concerned, just the look of the population. And so there is a way in which it's easy maybe to, you know, target something like, oh, they want to hire somebody from Montana. But if you were to observe that desire to hire somebody from Montana in a world in which nobody from Montana keeps getting hired no matter where they are, and there seems to be a politics to being from Montana, maybe the claim is not as absurd as it seems at first glance, and there is a rationale behind it.
Yeah, and I'll add also that, like, so much of the, like, anxiety about who gets jobs, the kind of like, oh, they just hired X candidate because they need Y, right? Like, and then the, like, you know, they need Y representation or diversity or whatever. I think so much of that, like, that profound anxiety that you see among job seekers, where it's like, oh, they didn't want me because I'm white, or they didn't want me because I'm a woman, or however it cashes out. So much of that has to do with the, like, increasing scarcity of jobs, period. And I think, like, focusing on, like, you know, oh, we need to make it strictly meritocratic, and we need to, like, completely eliminate any effort to sort of rectify, like, historical exclusions, misses the point, I think, a little bit about the labor conditions, the kind of, like, the scarcity of these jobs, these increasing proletarianization that does get cashed out in race and class terms. So, you know, so I understand, like, where the spirit of your question comes from, but I affirm what David said in terms of, like, it's not just a neutral category. It's not just, like, you know, guys from Montana. And he is right about our profession, statistically speaking, but also, like, a lot of the fierceness around these debates about hiring, about Canon, has to do with prior conditions, material scarcity.
100%, 100%. And I'm not disagreeing with that. And I'm also not suggesting that the underrepresented are somehow inherently inadequate or something as well. I'm not suggesting that. But what I'm suggesting is something like this: is that how do you say to a graduate student, right? How do you say to a graduate student, or say to any student, that I am going to grade you based on how well you perform, but how well you perform won't lead to anything else. How well you perform will not guarantee you anything, in terms of accomplishing something, right? So, and I just two quick statements here. The one is that at the university, well, I'll at one of the universities I used to teach at, on day one with the graduate students, they started saying this to them, and I think they're afraid of lawsuits is why they started saying this to them. But they started saying, we want you to know that with this graduate degree in philosophy, you will never get a job. And they're just openly saying this on day one, so it's like, if you still want to stick around, that's great. But so anyway, but my point just being is that, and hey, I don't know, I was in a situation in which I still believed that, if you're good enough, you get the job. If you're good enough, you get the job. And forgive me, the only other thing I'll say about this is that, but what I have seen is that people saying things like, some of these people I very much respect, but they're not saying things like, I want to. I said to a professor, they said, oh, enrollment is up. This was a while ago, before Trump's first term. Trump changed this in his first term, I believe. But so they said enrollment is up in the graduate philosophy. And I said to this professor, well, that's great. I said, evidently, philosophy is becoming more popular. People are enrolling in your graduate school. And he said to me, and I this guy, he's a genius. I mean, this guy, I respect his opinions on things all the way. And he said to me, no. He said, he says they're enrolling in grad school because as long as you're enrolled in grad school, your school loans aren't accruing interest. Right.
Yeah, and that's correct.
Yeah.
Right. I think they stopped that now, though. But maybe it's happening again. But so I guess my question is something like, so we're getting rid of the grading, we're getting rid of the merit in terms of who gets these jobs. We acknowledge that people are enrolled in this school so that they don't have to pay interest on their loans. I guess my question is something like, what is the school for? Like, what are we? I mean, really, what is the school for? Because if we say that the school is even trying to teach something, right, something called philosophy, I think that we're forced to acknowledge that there has to be some canon, or whatever you want to call it, that there has to be something that then we say that's what philosophy is, and then we can therefore evaluate your knowledge of philosophy based on how well you know that, right? And I don't know. Forgive me. It's all good. I want to celebrate your book. I think that your everything about it is great. No, really. I just wanted to push back a little bit on this idea of merit, because I don't understand it. I really don't. I feel like I can't understand how. I feel like the working class individuals mock it. I feel like the working class individuals mock it.
Mock, so it being
philosophy,
higher ed, or philosophy in particular.
Okay, so I'll give you an example. So there, I'm a big fan of the UFC. I love to watch the UFC. I don't know, a long story how I got into watching these things, but some of the, maybe I'm in the minority with that. But so some people will say things like, well, this person won the match, or this person won the fight, but we need to give the winnings and the belt or whatever was at stake, we need to give it to the other person because the other person comes from a country who really hasn't been winning a lot, and so therefore we have to, but they're being sarcastic, they're mocking it, right? Like, they're just saying, like, that's absolutely ridiculous. Like, there is a competition, there is a winner, and to suggest that there isn't is a deep perversion, right? And really, it's really also like a gaudy display of power, right? To say that you are the best, but it doesn't even matter because I'm in control, kind of thing. Like, and I kind of agree with that. and I feel like, but I feel like I'm coming from the same place. I really sincerely do feel like I'm coming from the same place that the two of you are coming from, and I also acknowledge the racism and all the biases that are at play, and they are there. They're absolutely there. I just don't know. I just don't know that trying to eliminate competition, trying to eliminate merit-based competition, I don't know that that's the answer.
Yeah,
So.
but I mean, I think you and Rebekah and I might agree on our diagnosis of some of the problems, right? So when you talk about graduate students being told you won't have a job, we agree that's happening. And to be honest, students should be told that.
Okay.
The problem is not diversification initiatives. The problem is that there aren't jobs for academics, and that those jobs are being squeezed out by the encroachment upon higher education by neoliberal values. And those jobs that are remaining are not paying well enough. That's where the adjunctification of academia comes in. And so when we think about what's the cause of what problem, I think we need to be very careful, because it almost sounded to me, and I don't want to speak for you, as if you're tracing all of those things to efforts to diversify the discipline. And I think that would be a mistake to attribute it to that particular thing. And so, for example, and I also think there are limits to the sports metaphor, because
Sure.
I mean, have I won at philosophy? I don't think the question makes sense. Like,
Oh no,
am I the
one. You have one, Dave. Yeah, I'm sorry.
But
I'm sorry.
I mean,
I don't know.
yeah, no,
Sorry,
but
I'm
I mean,
yeah.
no, I appreciate that. But the question is, what does winning mean in philosophy? Yes, I finished my degree. I have my PhD. And no, I did not get a job in philosophy. Yes, I ended up with a job, so I have material security. I am not an adjunct. I am also at a place where, for a number of reasons, my job, much like that of my non-tenure track colleagues, might be eliminated. We are at risk of massive cuts. The philosophy program and the humanities program might be cut. So what does winning mean? There is a clear sense to me in which intellectual activity is not like sports. And I say this as somebody who spends as much time doing philosophy as I do playing sports. I play a number of sports multiple times a week, and I compete and I travel for sports. And there's a sense in which I can't see the connection. And in fact, I think that the notion that philosophy is a contact sport or a battle sport is part of the way of thinking about philosophy that I think I would want to reject. And it's something that is particularly strong in philosophy, where we often think about it not being the force of physical bodies, but the force of argument, where philosophy is like the battle of reason, and you defeat your opponents, and the harder that you humiliate them in public, whether that's at a conference or in an argument or in publications, the more points you're awarded by an invisible jury. I think that's what has made philosophy somewhat inhospitable for many people. For many people who are like, you know what? Screw this. What is this space? All these people are just nasty to one another and want recognition and gratification for like using reason and logic and arguments as weapons. And there is a clear abdication of that deeper mission of philosophy, which is a pursuit of the good life, an understanding of the self, a way of inhabiting the world in a more meaningful sense. And so the thing I would push back against in terms of this conversation with you would be, one, the sports metaphor. I don't think it applies, and I think it's dangerous. And secondarily, I think that we can agree on the problem, but we are attributing it to very different causes.
Is it okay if I think Rebekah wants to say something, but may I just say one? Okay. So this is of course the theme of Plato's Euthydemus, right? Is that they compare philosophy to wrestling, and then Plato ultimately says, that philosophy is more than something like that. But that the metaphor and that the model is informative in some ways. But I'm not saying I am not. I think David put it very well, but I want to say that I am not tracing this back to efforts at diversification. I'm not tracing it back to that. What I'm tracing it back to is rejection of the idea of someone has earned something, right? That's how I'm thinking of merit, right? That like you have put in the work, you do know what you're talking about. You should be, I mean, there is a should there, right? Is that you should be rewarded in some way for that. You know, so if we don't want to go the diversification route, we can go from a different angle. At one of the universities that I was teaching at, you know, there was just this mad dash for accommodations. So people would come in and say, "I've got an accommodation," and I'm not allowed to ask why. And they say, "But this accommodation says that I get to have open book for the exam." And you know, I mean, you know, hey, my exams turned into open book exams for everybody. You know, I mean, it was pretty clear to me, you know, from some of the conversations and such that this was also something that was being exploited. And I understand that, you know, that it's not possible to remove all exploitation from the system, but I don't know. I've never understood, and I appreciate everything that you just said. I just have never understood how the ones who are doing the work and the ones who are, you know, trying to, you know, I see when you set a goal and you try to accomplish that goal, like, for example, I want to understand the phenomenology of spirit, right? When you set that goal and, you know, you can discern whether you've accomplished that or not, right? It can be discerned by, you know, people who are in a position to be able to judge that. And I think that though it is true that maybe, you know, certain people have had access to the phenomenology of spirit and other people have not, and things of those natures, in regard to diversification, I don't know that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. And this idea that, well, no one can evaluate your work. You know, I don't know, maybe I'm off base on this, but yeah, that's how I'm thinking about merit. So I apologize.
Rebekah, any thoughts on this? Or
no, you can take it away.
No, I'm trying to figure out how to clear space here, intellectually, because maybe we are defining merit to begin with very differently. And so just to keep it to a concrete example, I don't think merit by itself will ever be a grounds for decision making when it comes to, for example, a hiring decision. So let me just say what I mean by that.
Okay.
By the time, because there are so few jobs in academia, something that a lot of people who are outside of academia don't know is that for any job opening, especially an attractive one, you know, where you have some job security, at a normal school, I'm not talking about Harvard, I'm not talking about Stanford, at a state school where you have a fine pay as a state employee, will receive anywhere between 100 and 400 applicants. And easily. And not all of them will be the same. There are some that you can easily spot, like, okay, these are not competitive. You flush them out in the first round. That's why there are multiple rounds of eliminations. But even by the time you get to the very final round, when you have like 10 finalists and you need to narrow it down to the 3 that are going to go to the campus visit, by the time you narrow it that much, you have 10 people, all of whom have their PhD, all of whom are stellar, all of whom have different publications, and you cannot really rank them. Any one of them could be a perfectly fine addition to your program. And it's at that point that considerations enter of, okay, it's not that we're going to give it to somebody who doesn't merit it. It's that now extra meritocratic considerations maybe kick in. Because if I have a department that is all males, should I take that into account when I have a pool of 8 men and 2 women, all of whom have met the conditions for the job? They have publications, they have a PhD, they have good teaching evaluations. And so that's often how that conversation plays out. It's never the case that the conversation plays out with, we're going to give it to somebody even if they don't meet the basic requirements that are needed for qualification. And so we're not giving tenure track positions to people who haven't already jumped through the hoops of getting a PhD and who have already gone through the trouble of trying to articulate a vision, publications, conference presentations. And so I really want to disambiguate the notion of merit as we're using it and as we talk about it in the book from this sense of giving it to somebody who is unqualified, because I think that conflation takes us in directions where we just we're no longer speaking about the same thing.
That's completely fair. Yeah, no. So if what we're talking about is that we just need people who meet the minimum qualifications, and we are trying to make the department appear a certain way or have a wider appeal to students or something like that, then I mean that's a business decision, it seems to me. Maybe it's also a cultural, you're trying to right some cultural wrongs or something as well with it. So for example, Oklahoma State, the last time Oklahoma State had a tenure track position, I was at a conference talking to somebody who was on the hiring committee. There to Oklahoma State, there were 450 some applications. When I applied to the community college in New Jersey, they wrote me back and thanked me, and they apologized, and they said that there were over 500. I think they said there were 520 some applications to a community college in New Jersey. And when I was, I guess I can't say that. So I am aware of a place that they ran 2 back-to-back tenure track positions in 1 year, then the next year, and each year they got over 200 applications, and that was with saying that they encouraged a certain orientation to applicants, and they both got over 200 applicants. And I guess I do think that I'm in agreement with you. I guess what I'm trying to highlight, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, forgive me, but that the outcome of that search, and I can't, there's no way that I can mask this, sorry. But I was aware of the candidates that applied for that. Well, I'm in print saying this, so it doesn't matter. So I'm aware of the people of the 200 people. I'm aware of a large number of those 200 people who applied for that position, and I was also someone who applied for that position. And one of the people that I was competing against is a fella who graduated from Oxford University and had at that time had like 10 publications, the majority of which were published by Oxford University Press. And they didn't even consider the guy. And it turned out, after the university spent a lot of money, after all these people showed up and did their little dance and stuff, I mean, people had to fly around and all this stuff. It turned out that they decided that they really need, I mean, right, this was the justification, that the department really needed a female professor. And who would disagree with that, right? Like, how dare you, how white of you to disagree with that if that's what you want to do. But oddly enough, and this is what's so strange about this, is that of the 200 plus candidates, the female professor that they thought was, should I say the best candidate, turns out it's the person who's getting drunk with the chair of the department on the weekends. How strange is that? And well,
I guess welcome to the history of hiring with men hiring each other because they were drinking buddies for the last 50 years. I mean, the problem that the problem you're identifying has been happening the other way for so long that it's, I mean, to me, it borders not your position, but like the idea that you would hire your buddy and that's a sign of corruption. I agree. Like that would be a worrisome situation, but that has been the norm in higher education before the age of concerns about representation and diversity. It's just that it has not been presented in that way.
So there's nothing wrong with the good old boys club. We just need to make it more diverse.
I don't think that's what David's saying. I think
I don't. Yeah.
No, I mean it's like a function, not just. I mean, the fact that it's articulated along these lines, it's the same old story. It's like people who know each other like doing insanely corrupt things and hiring. That's not good. I don't think anybody thinks that's good. But I think it's like it's different. That's a separate question, right? From the like the original like formulation of like, oh, we need X to fill Y position. Like that's a separate question.
But that's why I think there is a misdiagnosis here, because the problem here is corruption. It's not the desire to have a woman in an all-male department. The desire to have a woman in an all-male department, great.
I agree with you.
You'll find that there would be people on a different side of the political spectrum who would say, oh yeah, that's kind of shitty that this particular situation played out like that. And so what is the problem there? Is the problem there hiring people that are your drinking buddies? Or is there the problem, the specific request in a job ad for people with a certain orientation, in this case, that orientation being sex identity?
No, I appreciate everything that you're saying. The problem, I think, is that we don't have a leg to stand on. That's what I think the problem is that there's no traction anywhere. Like we can't defend ourselves against this corruption. And I believe that they're paying lip service to this stuff. I mean, it's just rhetorical, or they just don't care anyway. You know what I mean? So I feel like, if we really want, I took the spirit of this book to be something like, this system needs to change, right? And right, and so I'm all for it, and sincerely, I mean, going forward, if there's any way that I can help you, I would be very happy to be a part of the process. Even, I'm just offering my 2 cents, and my 2 cents are something like, I think that in the scenarios that I've seen, I recognize that this is not the UFC, I'm not, but in the scenarios that I've been around, I just feel as though I'm open to determining what those objective criteria are. This is not a, gavel kind of situation, but I just think that if we cannot agree amongst ourselves on criteria that are rooted in philosophy, not in demographics. And I think the demographics are important. I'm not trying to say anything against demographics. What I'm trying to say is that these people that it seems to me, the people who are in power, they're just paying lip service to this demographic rhetoric. They're as evidenced by the fact that I understand you can say, hey, as long as this candidate was qualified, then it doesn't matter that there were better candidates than that candidate. I understand that you can say that. And
no, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, you have to wonder what better means, because it differs in various contexts. And so, for example, if I am teaching at a historically Black university, I do consider questions of who are my students. If you have an all-white professoriate at an historically Black college, that's a really weird look. If you have an all-male department, that's a really weird look. And it's one of the reasons why you're hemorrhaging undergrads who just are like, oh, this is a kind of like sausage fest, and I'm not sure that it's for me. And so it's not just about choosing somebody despite there being better people out there. It's really questioning whether somebody adds value to your department and to the discipline by virtue of the kind of work that they do. And the problem there is when you say we need objective measures relative to philosophy, neither objective measure nor philosophy is devoid of being fraught. Both of those are fraught concepts because the boundaries of philosophy are not clear. And so often what happens is that people who are interested in quote unquote peripheral or marginal themes, they are not even registered. They don't even register as philosophers in the eyes of the discipline. And so to say that they are not meeting the objective standard, it's just another way of saying that they're doing a kind of philosophy that is not mainstream. And that's how you end up with largely European and like androcentric departments where most philosophy departments call themselves philosophy departments, but the only thing they teach is North American and European philosophy. And you know, Rebekah and I were trained in that. That's what we wanted to study. That was our interest. We love it. But isn't it weird that like 3/4 of the world doesn't appear in philosophy departments? If that was the case with an art history department, it would be wild, right? Like if a department called themselves, we're the art history department, but we cannot tell you anything about art created outside of Europe and North America. And so, I mean, obviously, like we can keep going back and forth. It seems like we've sort of like figured out that there is a difference, right, in our understanding of what. It seems like we agree on there being problems with the current configuration of philosophy, but our intuitions maybe point in slightly different ways about ways to correct that.
Well, hey, I just want to say, though, that like this is absolutely the best answer that anyone has ever been able to give. And I'm sure a lot of people will think that it is. I mean, can we say that there is a right answer in this situation? But so I really do appreciate that you're entertaining this question from me sincerely. I really do mean that sincerely. And I think that the difference is this, and it is ontological. And I don't know that, you know, I don't believe that it should. I don't believe that it should divide us, because I would love to see the university reformed. But just to state it, you know, to put a very fine point on it, is that I actually do think that there is something called philosophy, right? I mean, I actually do. I mean, I said this as soon as we started. Like, I believe in the Western canon, I really do, and I recognize that could be a myth, and so on and so forth. But you know, I still think that the university is corrupt, and I still want to see it reformed. And I would love to see African philosophy. I would love to see, you know, Confucius and you know, these other philosophers that you mentioned. So I don't think I'm against you. I really don't think that I'm against you. I just, you know, like I said, I have an opinion about how the university should be reformed, and you know, maybe ontologically we have a disagreement in there, but I'm on 100% in support of whatever mission you have to reform the university. And I think that your diagnosis is 100% you know, on point. So
yeah, and our goal is to make philosophy more rather than less open, so that we can have differing ontological ideas of what counts as philosophy without trying to expunge the other from the precincts of philosophical reason.
100%. I totally agree. I wonder if maybe the idea is to get outside of the university somehow. You know what I mean? I mean, like to have real philosophy. Let them, if they want to keep perpetuating their sausage fest, then let them do it. But we have something that's actually real philosophy. You know, open real philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an open question. It's kind of how we ended our book. And I think, you know, especially for me, I'm like I'm at the end of a 3-year contract with my writing program. And so looking at the future and trying to think about like, where can I do philosophy outside of the academic philosophical discipline, because I honestly am pretty done with it. Like and not because I'm done with philosophy. I am not done with philosophy, and philosophy is not done with me, but I need to figure out like what exists and where are the places where you can sort of push and do something else. But ultimately, I think, like, you know, one can do these things outside of the academy. The academy, though, is a kind of given, and I would love to see it, if not radically reformed, I would kind of like to see a form of abolition, like something really new and different. That's what I really hope for, some kind of breaking dawn of philosophy that can, you know, provide the avenue towards a different and better world.
I love it. Well, thank you too so much. I hope that you know, if you ever want to talk again, I'm open to it. We can talk about whatever you want, but I really enjoyed this. I mean, thank you so much for your time and your book. I'm going to put together a little intro and outro for this. But your book is awesome. Your book is awesome. Sincerely. It's and that's I don't give praise away like that, you know, just easily. But your book is awesome. If I was writing a book review on this, I mean, I'd have nothing but praise. I think it's extremely well written. Like the rhythm, like as I was reading it, I was like, oh, I like this. And I mean that sincerely. You know what I mean? So there's something there. I mean, maybe we can do a kind of Derrida thing, and it's like it's in the writing. Right? In the writing. Your writing is not, I mean, it wasn't, I didn't feel like I was like, oh my God, I got to put this encyclopedia down. You know what I mean? Like, no, I was like, oh, this is smooth. It's flowing. It's like, it's introducing these ideas and it's not overwhelming me. And yet it's actually, you know, showing me lots of ideas. I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. I really wanted to have you on the podcast to talk about this. And I hope that all the libraries buy your book. I hope that, sincerely. I mean, and I hope that that folks out there that are not, affiliated with the libraries also buy your book, because the chapter 4 is worth the price of admission alone. Chapter 4 is the best statement of this I've ever seen by, is it okay if I say professional philosophers? But it's the best statement of this. It's the best statement of this I've ever seen by professional philosophers. And again, and chapter 3 is great. I mean, I really enjoyed your book. So
thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for the conversation. I've been looking forward to discussing this book with other people. And so it's genuinely a pleasure. Thank you for your questions. And thank you. So, I mean, I really enjoyed this conversation, genuinely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Wow.
All right. Bye-bye.
Enjoyable and thought-provoking. Comments and questions are welcome. Yeah. Until next time, stay wonderful. Ooh.